You are now listening to Sanity at the Movies, 2001 edition. Open the podcasting bay doors, Ben.
I can't do that, Nathan.
What?
This conversation is pointless.
Without the podcasting bay doors
I'm
open.
sorry, Nathan. Goodbye.
That's really sad. I guess I have to do this podcast by myself.
You should have picked someone who wasn't a robot to podcast with you.
Yeah, that is always my problem.
What are you doing, Nathan?
Podcasting.
I really think I deserve a reasonable explanation to that question.
Oh, man.
Nathan, I know I've been weird lately, but I'm going to be fine now.
I really should not have taken the intelligent boxes out of your
I'm going to do a good job.
your synaptic, whatever, your bank of boxes that comprise your personality.
Ever since I ejected
Jake.
Jake into space to die, I know you've been concerned, but everything's okay now,
I
Nathan.
really wasn't happy with you ejecting Jake into space. Made me really sad and impressed at the same time.
I'm scared, Nathan. I'm losing my mind. My mind is going. I can feel it.
The saddest part of the movie.
Yep, saddest part of the movie.
Gentlemen.
Gentlemen.
Ladies listen to this podcast, right? There's lots of ladies tuning in for 2001 A Space Odyssey.
Indubitably.
Gentlemen and ladies, welcome to our podcast on 2001. It's me, it's Ben. Jake has been ejected into the space of not doing this podcast.
That was for his own. Well, whose sake was it for? It was nice to Jake, in any case.
Yeah, I mean, Jake was willing to do this podcast. Me and Ben didn't force him to do this podcast. This is not his favorite movie. He thinks it's a little boring. And I'm not afraid to admit that, because I think one of the things you have to deal with about this movie is that a lot of people think it's boring. And in fact, maybe part of the design of the movie is
that it's boring. Yep.
It is actually intentionally, in some artistic way, perhaps, if one wants to argue this, it is showing you the monotony of space travel or achieving some of its grand effect through monotony and repetition and this sort of thing. And the film in question, of course, 2001, A Space Odyssey, the seminal Stanley Kubrick film. We are how many years past 2001 now?
We're 21 years past.
We are 21 years past. We are living in a world of manned missions to Jupiter and cool red 60s, really uncomfortable looking chairs. We're living in 2001, baby. And we're talking about 2000. Ben, why are we talking about 2001?
Because it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's one of the most significant movies ever made, because it's interesting to talk about it. It's a very cosmic movie, in the sense, not just that it's about space, but in the sense that it's about, as Kubrick would say, man's relationship to the universe.
Yes.
It's taken on like the big themes, and Kubrick's not a Christian, if anyone didn't know, and probably quite hostile to Christianity. But this is a movie about like, well, what is man and what is it to be human? And if we're evolving, what could we evolve into, or what should we evolve into? It influenced everything. It influenced Star Wars a lot. This podcast has spent a lot of time on Star Wars, and 2001 has fed right into what Star Wars became. George Lucas's design for things, and you could in some shots in 2001, you're like, oh, that's where they got that.
Yeah, exactly.
And Kubrick is one of the most significant filmmakers ever. Feels like if you're going to do a movie podcast for a while, you should talk about 2001.
Right. He is hugely influential, Stanley Kubrick. 2001 is arguably the great science fiction film. I mean, I don't know what else you'd be. So distinguishing science fiction from sort of science fantasy, these are all loose terms that people argue about. But if you don't count Star Wars as science fiction, if when you say science fiction, what you mean is a movie that's actually dealing with ideas about technology and about man's place in the universe and about what the future might be like, that kind of thing. I don't really think you could name a film that's been more influential, more beloved in some quarters than
Oh, Nathan, Terminator. Ever seen it?
I was forgetting about, when you say Terminator, of course, you mean Terminator, Dark Genesis.
Of course.
The classic.
I don't believe I have to specify.
No.
Listener, you understand what I mean, right? You're in the know about Terminator, Dark Genesis.
I think that's the name of one of
No,
them.
it's not. we totally butchered it. There's Terminator Genesis, and then there's Terminator Dark Future or something.
Dark Fury, I think, was a Riddick animated special or something like that.
Okay, hold on. We're going to clear this up right now.
This is very important.
Wow. Terminator Dark Fate.
Dark Fate. I'm sorry.
Whoopsie, and Terminator Genesis. But I think Terminator Dark Genesis. That should remain the gold standard.
Ben, should we go back in time and force the studio to make Terminator Dark Genesis?
Yeah.
Is that our fate?
As long as we could do it with a killer robot.
I mean,
that looks like a Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Is there any other kind?
No. People have tried.
People have tried.
Killer robots that look like Mario Van Peebles, but they just weren't as popular.
They just weren't. I don't know what the problem was with the People's model. Listen, folks, we're going to talk about all kinds of... The other reason to talk about 2001 is because there's just a lot of interesting things you can talk about. You can talk about popular ideas of transcendence and sort of scientism and the religion of scientism. Certainly, there's a lot about robots and artificial intelligence. This is probably the movie and a very influential movie when it comes to a certain kind of depiction of the dangers of AI and
definitely
all that stuff. It's going to be all kinds of stuff to talk about from 2001. I mean, it's just... And Stanley Kubrick's worth talking about. He's Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and your favorite filmmakers, Christopher Nolan. If you're a big Christopher Nolan head, we are not huge Nolan heads on this podcast, although we've certainly spent a chunk of our life engaging with the man, and he is inevitable.
That's great.
If you're a Nolan head, Nolan, I think, kind of views himself almost as though he's trying to do the modern equivalent of the Kubrick thing, make kind of heady, sci-fi, thoughtful. Inception was that. Certainly Interstellar is his riff on 2001, and a terrible riff it is, in my humble opinion, but that's a podcast for another day. I do like the soundtrack. But yeah, so 2001.
There's no Elon Musk without this movie, both in terms of his kind of whole view of mankind as evolving towards some kind of, what do they call it when we suddenly become one with the robots, the synergy, or it's got a word like that, but I forget what it is. Who's the black guy that talks about we're all stardust, really obnoxious scientist guy?
Neil Tyson deGrasse?
Neil deGrasse Tyson, my friend.
Oh, sorry about that, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I haven't read him.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's very much downstream of this movie. This movie just really encapsulates, and I think did encapsulate for a generation, and maybe more than one generation, the kind of religion of science, sort of pop scientism. It's a movie maybe if your kid is a budding science fiction fan, to show them they might be very bored by it, or they might love it in all the right ways, or they might love it in all the wrong ways. I can't pretend to know what they'd do with it, but so
it's a thing, and we're going to talk about it. And here we go.
I mean, we both kind of grew up as sci-fi fans, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah.
So what is your history with 2001?
I never saw it until in my, I want to say early 20s.
Early 20s, yeah.
I think I finally got curious enough to check it out from the library. I had a friend who was really into it, and I love Stanley Kubrick, and just talked about how Kubrick is just ahead of you as a director all the time. He's a very intellectual director. He's very much, he has a plan, a program for his movies. He wants them to be works of art, and he's just not going to do the typical kinds of Hollywood things that movies do. And he talked up 2001 to me. I don't think I'd seen it before he talked it up to me. I had some slight interest, but after he and I talked about it, if I'm remembering the timeline right, I saw it after that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm falsifying my own history, Nathan.
Whoa.
I know. Maybe I saw 2001 and was a little indifferent, and then years later talked with this friend about it. So that's about it. I've seen it one time and for this podcast, so 2 times now. And I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I mean, so this was one of those movies that there was a handful of movies that my dad wanted to watch with me as touchstones, and not touchstones for understanding movies, but for understanding whatever the subject was. So, for example, and it was weird because my dad was not a big movie guy, and he was pretty strict about sex and violence and stuff like that. But if movies touched on certain themes, then he would think, well, that maybe we can give a pass to this one. So, for example, the most extreme example, but also one that makes sense if you've seen the movie, is Goodfellas. And my dad would never let me watch The Godfather. He said, like, The Godfather is evil. But Goodfellas really shows you exactly what that life is about. And my dad grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is a corrupt, wicked, gangster-ridden town, or at least it was when he grew up in it. And I think it probably still is, as far as I know. Sorry, Bridgeport listeners, but please don't kill me. But he's just like, you have to watch Goodfellas to actually understand what the real gangster lifestyle is and how people are seduced into it. So that was an example of that. Apocalypse Now was an example of, you're not allowed to watch Platoon. You're not allowed to watch Full Metal Jacket. These are evil movies, but Apocalypse Now actually has something to say about Vietnam and the experience and actually gets at something about it. And 2001 was one like that. Like, if you want to just understand the pagan understanding of the universe, I guess, or of evolution, or of, like, if you want a touchstone for how people think about religious experiences outside of religion, then 2001, I don't know how you'd say it, the atheist religious experience, maybe. 2001 is a touchstone for that. And so my dad said, I don't really even understand this movie, but we'll watch it. And if you want to if you really want to read it, understand it, you have to read the book, and you can do that in an afternoon. It's not a hard, which my dad wasn't like a fiction reader. He wasn't a sci-fi reader, but he just, for whatever reason, thought 2001 was important. So I remember watching it pretty young. I mean, maybe as a 8 or 9 year old. It's a G-rated movie, actually. There's nothing particularly, the ideas are heady and kind of disturbing if you're wrapping your mind around them, but there's not a lot of gore, maybe some monkey gore at the beginning.
Yeah, if that. I mean, yeah, everything feels very abstract and pulled back and cold, and it's just not, if it is visceral, it's visceral because of the ideas. And that's what Kubrick wanted it to be. Yeah, I definitely remember, I mean, as a kid, I loved Star Wars, but I remember knowing 2001 was a big epic space movie, but being a little confused as to why anyone would watch it if it didn't have lightsaber battles.
Right, exactly.
Because I was given to understand that it wasn't an action movie, it wasn't like an adventure. So my attraction was limited.
Yeah, I don't know what I thought of it. I think I just kind of accepted it as, we're doing a thing as a family. The first time, it's like, it's not my choice. We're just watching this, and it's kind of washing over me. And I don't remember being particularly bored by it. I think I was enough of a budding cinephile. I don't know if I knew who Stanley Kubrick was, but I was aware of the fact that it was supposed to be something interesting and important. And I think I tried to enjoy it on that level without really understanding it. I mean, I was pretty struck by the planets aligning at the beginning and the Dawn of Man sequence and stuff like that. Maybe once you get to, here's 5 minutes of stewardesses walking upside down while classical music plays, that might have lost me a little bit. But
yeah, and certainly there's a pretty fun suspense sequence with Hal.
Yeah, well, and there is
really well.
There is at least one visceral sequence where you just hear that breathing, which for me at least is like a nail-biting sequence.
Yes,
like
I agree.
It really drives me nuts.
Agree. It's really creepy.
Yeah, it's really creepy. But certainly this is a movie that I've appreciated more in my adult years than I ever did as a kid. I guess it's worth saying I like space stuff. I like space adventure. I mean, I like Star Wars and stuff, but I also like more heady kind of, what if we met intelligent life? What would it be like? Those kinds of things, the wonder and the terror of what's out there in the stars, any kind of movie. Like I'm not a huge fan of the original Ridley Scott Alien movie, but the first kind of third of that movie before the alien actually pops out, when they're just they're just out in the far reaches of space and they land on this creepy H.R. Giger designed planet, and they're walking through the kind of ancient ruins of something. Like, that kind of stuff really gets me, like excites me. It always has since I was very young. I like that the Jodie Foster movie Contact. Like, I'm a sucker for any kind of we're gonna suddenly meet space things and it's gonna be weird and different and crazy. So
Yeah, I like stuff like that too. Yeah, this has some of that for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's in some. Well, I suppose we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. It's an interesting movie to talk about. Jake. It's not boring. It is kind of boring. I don't know. I mean, I don't begrudge anyone. Do you begrudge someone thinking this movie's boring?
No, I don't. But I think it's worth pressing through and seeing what makes it interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those novels that you read more to have read or think about. It's not necessary. Yeah, you have to engage with it. You have to do a little work. It doesn't just wash over you and give you an experience that sans any kind of work, or you've got to bring something to it. Let's do a little bit more personal context, and then we'll do some big picture context. You said you were a Kubrick fan, Stanley Kubrick, of course. If we didn't actually say the director of this movie, arguably his most famous, although he's made a number of them that are absolutely iconic.
I would say I'm not exactly. My friend was a Kubrick fan. I am. Let's see. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen many Kubrick movies, and Kubrick is going to be often really gross.
Yeah,
really vile. I guess I've seen. Yeah, I guess I've seen The Shining, or most of it anyway. Maybe I've seen an edited version on TV. I don't remember. I'm not a horror guy at all. The Shining is just a very compelling kind of thriller type movie. And it's weird. It also feels like this director is not just directing a horror movie. He has some other thing up his sleeve. He's trying to talk about something else. It's weirdly abstract. It's strange.
Yeah, it's not. I've never found it to be particularly scary. It's compelling in another way. I mean, it's creepy. And I wonder if I went back to it now, whether I'd find it more scary, because the idea of killing your own kid, which is what it plays with a lot, is one that might mean something more to me now that I'm looking at it from the perspective of the dad instead of the kid.
I think so.
But I don't know. In its own way, it's a pretty cold movie, even though it is about a family falling apart, just because Jack Nicholson is so crazy from the very beginning that you don't really identify with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an odd... Yeah.
It's odd.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen Barry Lyndon, which I think is an awesome movie. It has it has one objectionable scene.
Towards the very beginning, I think.
Not exactly. Well, okay, maybe two objectionable scenes.
Right.
But the scene at the beginning is just suggestive and gross, but also cold in a way that didn't, back 10 years ago when I saw it, didn't make me feel too bad. While there's another scene in the middle that's actual nudity and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So
it's been years since I've seen it.
Yeah, but Barry Lyndon is an adaptation of a Thackeray novel. It's a British novelist circa 19th century. Must have been 19th century.
Sure, yeah.
And it's Thackeray is one of the most sarcastic, sardonic writers you can possibly imagine. And this movie, it fits Kubrick to a T. To be sarcastic, to be sardonic, while also being sort of tragic.
Right.
I don't know how to describe it. It's unusual.
Right.
It's unusual. It's funny without being a comedy in the typical sense. It is a comedy, I guess, in the Thackeray style. And it's strange and weird. And I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. You've seen Barry Lyndon?
Yeah. I think I've seen all of Stanley Kubrick's movies that aren't like his warm up. Like once he worked for Hollywood and had a budget, I've seen everything. But it's very sarcastic, but it's also played so straight and so sort of without affectation that I could see somebody not being on the right wavelength and missing it. Like just taking it sincerely and thinking, what is this weird period piece that just kind of regards its characters from afar? And it's hard to describe if you haven't seen it. I mean, well, maybe the best way to do this is actually to talk about Stanley Kubrick and who he was and what he did, even before we talk about our own personal reactions, because it's easier to describe our personal reactions maybe in relation to once we've described what his style is and stuff for people who don't know. So a little context about Stanley Kubrick. It's hard to talk about Stanley Kubrick without first talking about Stanley Kubrick. So let's lay a little pipe here, and then we can gush the water of insight through this pipe that we have lain. But without the pipe, it's hard to start the insight water. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, good, because I
do it.
have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I'm just flowing through the insight pipe with you.
Flowing through the insight. So Stanley Kubrick, one of the most iconic and famous of all directors, one of the first directors that you encounter in film school, or if you're learning about film, if you're trying to go beyond who's popular right now, or you're like, I don't just want to watch Marvel movies, I want to watch other things, then inevitably you're going to encounter very quickly Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick. I'd say they're the two. And I have a theory as to why they're the two. I don't think it's just because they're geniuses, although they are, but I think there's another reason why, but I'll get to that. So, but let's talk about Stanley Kubrick. Very important filmmaker, very influential filmmaker. Any filmmaker that you like was probably influenced. I'll tell you who wishes he was Stanley Kubrick, and I think I'm not saying this because to be mean, I think he's basically said this, is Christopher Nolan. He's always trying to kind of strive for that big abstract idea-based cerebral, and he's not a pimple on.
Wow, I didn't know he actually had said that. I guess I'm just a Nolan ignoramus.
Yeah, well, you know who else is a Nolan ignoramus? It's Christopher Nolan, the ignoramus. But Interstellar is kind of a 2001 riff, a super lame 2001 riff, in my humble opinion. I don't know. Anyway, we don't have to bash Nolan. But let's talk about Stanley Kubrick, the great and influential Stanley Kubrick. He came from a Jewish family. He grew up in the 30s and 40s of the 20th century. He was, I guess that makes more sense than him growing up in either the 19th or the 21st century. Aren't you glad that I specified that, Ben?
I am very glad.
So he's this shy boy. He hates school. He's bad at it, but he always talked about how stupid his school was, but he joined a photography club and ended up doing really well as a photographer in school, and then out of school, he would have gone to college, but the year that he would have gone to college was a year called 1945. And you know what happened in 1945, Ben?
No.
World War II ended.
Oh, you got me there, Nathan.
So there's all these vets coming back, and they need jobs, and they need college opportunities, and everyone's like, yay, vets, and yay, the boys. And so they're taking up all the slots of the good jobs and all the university slots, basically. So if Kubrick had maybe tried to go to college in 1944, he would have been fine. But 1945, nobody's really interested in accepting this shy, bespectacled Jewish kid who didn't do that well in school into college. So he's got to make his way in the world. He has this photography skill, and he goes to Look magazine. Look magazine was a competitor to Life magazine, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with. What's distinctive about Life is that they have big, glorious photograph displays. That's all about the photographs and many iconic pictures of the 20th century, things that, the guy standing in front of the tank at Tiananmen Square, or pictures of JFK or Marilyn Monroe, or the iconic pictures have gone through Life magazine. And Look magazine is a competitor to Life magazine, and another photography-based magazine with little blurbs of text, but it is not like the New Yorker is all text, and maybe there'll be a little drawing or photograph occasionally where it helps. Life is the opposite. It's photographs, mainly with little blurbs to explain the photographs when needed. But basically, it's just let's show America, and let's show not just celebrities, but let's just have photographs of everything, because the internet doesn't exist, so people might like to see photographs of other people or of interesting things. So Kubrick ends up becoming a photographer, and he's a wonderful photographer, and he takes photographs of life in New York City, photographs of boxing matches. You can find his photographs online. They're wonderful, and they're the kind of photographs, if you've ever just looked at cool photographs by great photographers, the photograph tells a story. You see a husband and wife, or old grizzled man smoking a cigarette or something. Whatever it is, there's a whole life in this one image that's captured. And Kubrick was that kind of photographer and became quite successful working for Look magazine. But at the same time, he became obsessed with cinema. He would spend all his money and all his free time going to see movies. And at a certain point, and this is the story of many creators, you decide to become a creator because you're like, no matter how bad I am, I can do better than that. It's nice when you're starting to write and you're writing things and you feel like you can't figure out how to even write a scene of dialogue but then suddenly you read a book and it's worse than what you do. It's like a bad book. And you're like, wait a second, so this guy's published, this guy's making money, maybe I can do it too. And that's what Kubrick said. Like he saw some movies and he's like, well, I might not be able to do great, but I could probably do better than that. Whatever it was. Gone with the Wind. I could probably do better than that. So he raises his own money and he's really into boxing. He's done a lot of boxing photography for Look magazine. He raises his own money, makes a 16-minute boxing documentary called Day of the Fight, which was good enough to get some attention. And then he begins to do more little independent movies. He really is a guy that worked his way up from nothing. Didn't have any industry connections, wasn't born in Hollywood. But in 1953, he puts together the money to do a little movie called Fear and Desire. It's considered his first full-length movie. And it's this weird movie that takes place in like a forest where a war is going on. But it's not a war that has been fought, nor one that will be, but it is any war. So we're watching people fight in any war. And it's an anti-war movie, which is a theme that runs through a lot of Kubrick, and that gets the attention of Hollywood. They hire him. I forget which Hollywood company, but a producer hires him to make a professional movie. The first one he makes is The Killing in 1956, which is a great movie. It's a good film noir and a classic film noir. Kubrick's one of those guys that hopped genres a lot, did a lot of different kinds of movies, and oftentimes would make the best movie, or at least something that could be argued to be the best movie in that genre. So The Killing is one of the best film noirs. And then he made, in 1957, Paths of Glory with Kirk Douglas, which is an anti-war movie. Do you ever see Paths of Glory?
No, never did.
It's interesting. It's kind of sad. It's about the bureaucrats order the soldiers to go over a hill into some unwinnable position. And they try, but they're beaten back, and then they're put on trial for cowardice, and spoiler alert, ultimately executed, even though they tried to do the maneuver. It couldn't be done. And so the general that ordered the dumb maneuver wants to cover his behind and is willing to have these men executed. So war, the tragedy of old men sending young men to die.
So it had a real effect on you, huh?
I don't really care about it one way or another, but it does have that. As far as that sort of thing goes, it's well done.
Right.
And then 1960, he does Spartacus, which many people would argue is one of the best epic movies of all time. Certainly one of the most cerebral and thoughtful of all the biblical epic kind of things. There are a lot of them, Ben-Hur, stuff like that was coming out at the time. And to this day, we've got wonderful films like Gladiator and stuff like that. But Spartacus is actually one that has more thought, better dialogue. Interesting. But Kubrick still hasn't gotten full creative control. Paths of Glory and Spartacus are both basically Kirk Douglas movies. He was a big star at the time. The first movie that Kubrick does that's really just fully Kubrick is Lolita in 1962. Which is a pretty good adaptation of a impossible to adapt novel. There's nobody had any business trying to adapt Lolita, and I don't mean that morally, because I don't actually think if you read the novel Lolita, it's prurient or it's an interesting novel. It's not, given its subject matter, it's not. I don't know. Did you ever have to read Lolita or anything? It's not trying to be pornographic or anything like that. It's trying to do something else. I don't know exactly what that is. It's playing literary games and stuff like that, but it's not a movie or it's not a book that actually draws you into pedophilia exactly. I don't know what it does. I don't want to litigate Lolita today. If people have different opinions about Lolita, that's fine. The only point is really impossible to adapt novel, and Kubrick does a pretty good job with Peter Sellers playing the villain in that one. And then in 1964, we've got Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which is arguably the actual greatest anti-war movie ever made. Arguably the greatest black comedy ever made. I don't know. Are you a Dr. Strangelove?
I have seen. I forgot I'd seen Dr. Strangelove I forgot it was a Kubrick movie or something. Just forgot about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've seen that a couple times. I like it.
it's pretty great.
Yeah,
It's pretty great. It's pretty funny.
it's pretty funny.
Very sarcastic, very mean,
Oh,
very
man.
stick in the eye of
Very cold.
all authority is dumb, and certainly all American authority is dumb, and all the military industrial complex is dumb. Which is those kinds of movies are there's a lot of them, and they're usually pretty childish in their critique. But Doctor Strangelove is something. It's got a sharp, mean edge to it.
Yeah,
and,
it does for sure.
and it connects in a way. I mean, it works. And then 1968, 2001, A Space Odyssey, which we're talking about today. Most people would argue, or many people would argue, the best science fiction, the best hard sci-fi, I guess you'd say, the best science. There's different strains of science fiction. There's science fiction that's like, yay, Wookiees and lightsabers, and basically it's just a Western, but in space. But then there's sci-fi that actually wants to consider ideas about science, about technology, about the universe. And those movies are rarer and harder to do. And 2001 Space Odyssey is at least in the running for being the greatest of them all. I mean, it probably is. I don't even know what you'd put up against it. Arrival with Amy Adams, maybe? That would be stupid. Clockwork Orange, very deviant, evil film, comes out in 1971. Do not recommend anybody watches it, but it certainly is in the running for the most well-evoked dystopian film of all time. It was very iconic when it came out. And then 75, we've got Barry Lyndon, which people might argue is the best period drama of all time. In 1980, we've got The Shining, which many people would argue is the best horror movie of all time. I'm not saying that these arguments are correct. I'm just saying that's what people might say. And then Full Metal Jacket in 87, which many people would say is the best Vietnam movie of all time, something I disagree with quite a bit. I do not like Full Metal Jacket
I haven't seen it.
at all.
Why not?
It's cynical. It's cheap in its effect, and Kubrick was so sort of behind the times at that point, actually. Everything's filmed in a studio, and you can tell, and everything's kind of cliched, and it's like all his ideas about the war come from World War II and the stuff he was familiar with. Meanwhile, you have these exciting young filmmakers like Oliver Stone doing Platoon and
Brian De Palma.
doing
Casualties of War, that's the one of these movies I have seen. There's actually no other Vietnamish movie I've seen.
Yeah,
I don't think.
Well, the greatest of them all, in my opinion, is Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola. But you had all these angry young men that actually grew up in the generation that made Vietnam movies, and then you had a grumpy old timer, Kubrick, think he was going to come along and show him up, and I just don't think he did. And then, of course, his career goes out with a bit of a whimper in 1999 with Eyes Wide Shut, which is a erotic thriller, I guess you'd say, and not something I recommend that anybody watch, and just not a very good movie, even despite that, and comes out in 1999, which is the same year that Kubrick dies. So what you'll notice about that list, and what you'll notice about Kubrick, is once he gets going, and once he becomes kind of an institution, what he does is he becomes slower and slower in making the movies. 2001 is 68, and then Clockwork Orange is 71, and then Barry Lyndon a full 4 years later, 75, and then The Shining takes 5 years to 1980, and then Full Metal Jacket is 87, and then it's like 12 or 13 years until Eyes Wide Shut in 99. So this guy is not prolific. He's slow. He likes to take his time. He likes to plan everything. I mean, he is famous as being the most fastidious director maybe of all time. And his movies, it's one of the reasons why film buffs love his movies and love discovering them, because everything was controlled, everything was thought through. If the rug is a certain color in the background, it's because Stanley took hours, if not days, picking out that rug. It had meaning to him. There's just nothing that's not in his purview. He's famous for doing 50 takes or 100 takes with his actors at any given time to get exactly the performance he wants, to get them to forget that they're giving lines, and to just be so beaten down that they're just not even thinking about it by the time they give the performance. Like that's what he wants, and he wants a perfect performance. He wants the composition to be perfect, precise, controlled. I mean, he is the most famous director for that sort of thing. And there's all kind of horror stories about actors in his movies having nervous breakdowns and stuff like that, just because of how much he demanded of them and how little he's sort of rewarding them for it. He's not giving them a chance to just express themselves and act and be in the moment. He just wants it to be exactly what he wants it to be. Hitchcock is famous for the same sort of thing, but Kubrick takes it to an extreme where it's the guy that plays the black caretaker of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. I forget what his name is off the top of my head, but apparently he started crying because Kubrick made him do 100 takes of some simple dialogue scene, and he just could not get it. And Shelley Duvall, who plays the wife in The Shining, is supposed to be having a nervous breakdown in the movie as her husband goes crazy and starts stalking her through this hotel. And in order to elicit that response, Kubrick just made her redo things over and 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 over again until she just went crazy. So he's not necessarily a nice guy to work for. But he is famous for planning things, for having these really precise visuals. He's famous for something called one-point perspective, which is where if you imagine a painting like The Last Supper, for example, is a famous example of one-point perspective because it's got a horizon line and then it's got one vanishing point on the horizon line. I don't know how to explain this without visuals, but like if you imagine a picture of train tracks disappearing into the horizon, that's one-point perspective. There's one point where everything is angled towards and the train tracks are disappearing and the scenery is disappearing towards that one point visually, and the horizon's about halfway up the frame. Now think about The Last Supper. It's actually the same thing. Jesus is in the middle and all the apostles are on either side, disciples, and there's a vanishing point. Jesus is the vanishing point, and everything's arranged to give this kind of three-dimensional feel. The movies of Wes Anderson, if you're familiar with that visual style, it's all one-point perspective. Like the camera's kind of flat on a parallel plane with the actors, and everything's kind of parallel and composed, and oftentimes there's only one vanishing point, as opposed to if you think about a picture of a angle of a corner of a building, there's two vanishing points. The building is disappearing two different ways. I don't know. You can look this up on Google, folks. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, it might help you to have visuals. It's a little hard to describe on a podcast, but if you watch a montage of clips from Kubrick movies, you'll immediately see what I'm talking about. It's all this very cold, very composed, very symmetrical compositions, very precise, planned camera movements, no coverage where it's just like, we got some extra footage, so we needed to make the scene work. No, it's like, we've planned this. We have extreme control and perfectionism over every element of this film, from the composition to the music. There's no, what people who don't like the style will accuse him of is that there's not a lot of air in it. It's like so controlled that the actors aren't making a move ever that they haven't rehearsed 50 times, and you know that everything's been thought through, and there's no kind of room for human warmth or improvisation. Or if you compare it to something like Jaws, it just feels kind of loose and alive in the way that the filmmaking is done and the way that the characters are interacting. There's a lot of room for play, even though Spielberg's a great director and has a lot of control over everything. There's a lot of room for the characters to kind of interact, and you kind of feel like, well, Roy Scheider probably just did that in the moment. You don't know whether that's true or not, but it has that feeling at least, and it feels like, well, probably that kid was just in the background, or that rug was just, that's just the way the house looked. It doesn't feel like Kubrick has the feeling of everything being controlled, and maybe even some of that is exaggerated, some of that is the legend, but it still feels that way. You never feel like there's anything that's not exactly the way that this man wanted it to be, which is kind of fun and intoxicating for a cinemaphile. Like I said, it's the same thing as like when Cormac McCarthy, every 10 years, he's a reclusive artist, he comes out with a new novel, and it's like he thought about it for 10 years and worked on it and tinkered with it, and everything must have a meaning. Everything must have a point. You can pore over it and find all the little details, and what did it mean that this number was in the background here, or that this color was used there. It rewards that kind of scrutiny, which not every movie does. The other thing I would say, and this is answering the question that I set up earlier as to why Hitchcock and Kubrick are so well known, why they're kind of the first stops for budding young filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because the movies are violent and have sex. I think I have a kind of principle that I call the prurience principle, which says that sex and violence are always good selling points, even if they're ostensibly not the main selling point. In other words, go to the example of Nabokov, who wrote Lolita. He did a lot of interesting experimental novels, and I wouldn't say that any one of them is any better than Lolita, but there's exactly one that people read and that people remember and that kind of exists in the public imagination, and it's the one about the pedophile. And it's not necessarily because he set out to be prurient with it, but because it happens to contain that element, it's the one that everybody kind of remembers. I mean, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy are arguably not greater artists than Gogol or Turgenev, but Dostoevsky wrote about murder and Tolstoy wrote about adultery, and everybody can tell you what Anna Karenina is about, even if they haven't read it. They can't necessarily tell you what Dead Souls by Gogol is about, or what Fathers and Sons. I guess they know Fathers and Sons by Turgenev is about fathers and sons. But everybody knows what Anna Karenina is about. Everybody knows what Madame Bovary is about, because there's something in us that's just intrigued by the dark side of things. And so if you're a budding young film scholar who's just like, well, I need to watch something besides Spielberg or something besides Marvel movies, you could go to Orson Welles, or you could go to the Japanese films of Ozu or someone like that, and learn just as much about cinema. But why not go to Hitchcock, who's fun and sexy and violent and ghoulish? And why not go to Kubrick, who's similarly interested in violence and interested in sexuality and interested in these kinds of things? So I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. It's a, we tend to be attracted to these kinds of things, which is, I think, why somebody like Hitchcock or somebody like Kubrick, I mean, certainly for me as a young man, when I was discovering these things, that was probably the reason that some of the stuff was more intriguing than other things that that would have been just as good in terms of understanding cinema or whatever. So I don't know. That's Stanley Kubrick. Anything else you want to say in summation of him?
No, nothing.
No, nothing. Well, 2001, I could set that up very quickly before we kind of talk our way through it. So 2001 premiered in 1968, exactly 1 year before the moon landing, which is an interesting point that we'll come back to real quick. But I read a New Yorker article that said, in the annals of audience restlessness, the only thing that compares is Stravinsky's Rites of Spring, which famously people got so mad at how stupid and pointless Rites of Spring felt to them at the time that they ripped their chairs up and rampaged through the theater. That's the legend, at least. I think it's the truth. And 2001, similarly, like, people were just walking out when it premiered. They did not understand. They jeered. They didn't like it. Jake's not the first person to be bored. Arthur Clarke, the sci-fi author who helped write the screenplay, was in tears by the end of the premiere just because everybody hated the movie and didn't understand it. The reviews were pretty harsh, including by a lot of the more hip film critics. Pauline Kael, who we'll talk about her response to Sound of Music later this year, but she was the big film critic of the time, and her quote, I think I have it here. Yeah, if big film directors are to get credit for doing badly what others have been doing brilliantly for years with no money just because they put it on a big screen, then businessmen are greater than poets and theft is art. That's what she said. So in other words, there's cool indie directors that are doing interesting experimental films, and here's Kubrick boringly stealing it all and trying to make us think it's profound just because he has more money. But what saved the movies was the hippies who found that this movie was a great trip. This movie was a great trip, especially if you took LSD. And if you timed your LSD trip right, it could happen exactly when the astronaut, I guess his name is Dave. Is Dave the hero of the movie?
I think so.
When the astronaut is going through the Stargate and all the pretty colors and stuff are going by him, you could make your high sort of crest along with that. And so this whole generation of all the people that were into things like Easy Rider and stuff like that, all the bad boy hippie kind of generation made this movie. And the studio actually caught on, and the posters, the first wave of posters are like trying to bring in a family audience to see this cool sci-fi movie. The second wave of posters have a tagline, which is the ultimate trip, because they realize sometimes you don't know who your audience is until you put your thing out, and then you figure out exactly who your audience is. So this movie came out April 2, 1968. It's important, like I said, to say that in July 20th, 1969, the moon landing happens, because Kubrick knew he was trying to beat the moon landing. He knew the moon landing was going to happen. He knew that he had a sci-fi movie that if it didn't feel realistic, or if it felt like it would be easy for him to actually get supplanted by what was happening in real life. So he needed to actually think beyond and think accurately about space travel and about, he knew people were going to be watching the moon landing on TV. So my movie needs to better it and not feel cheesy and chintzy and stupid by comparison. And so he reached out he just wanted to make a good sci-fi movie. That was all he had in mind. So he reaches out to Arthur Clarke. Did you ever read any Arthur Clarke?
Yeah, I read Clarke. I
never have.
I don't really recommend him. I read Rendezvous with Rama and its sequels, which was a mistake. It's about people going to an alien spacecraft that's strange and abstract and makes them ask questions about the nature of the universe and stuff. And then there's sequels.
Yeah.
And I think I've read a short story or two. And I mean, Arthur Clarke's an okay writer. Arthur Clarke is much more interested in abstractions than in humans.
Yeah. I mean, he was at the time known as one of the big three. And the big three were Clarke, Robert Heinlein, and Isaac Asimov. Heinlein's maybe a little pulpier, but I would say all three of those guys are not we're shooting bug monsters with ray guns school of sci-fi. They're all about ideas and what would an artificial intelligence look like? What would an alien intelligence look like? They're about exploring these kinds of things and trying to find answers. And Clarke was probably, to my knowledge at least, because I've read some Heinlein. I've read more Heinlein and Asimov than it would be easy. I've read more Cat in the Hat. I've read more anything than I've read Clarke, because I've never cracked a Clarke book. But Clarke, as far as reputation goes, at least, had more scientific knowledge than anybody. Like, he was more of an actual futurist and understood more about how things actually worked and the way that space works and stuff than even Asimov, who is pretty famous for being an actual good scientist, I think. And it's not my favorite school of sci-fi, those three men. But I mean, Clarke was a chairman of the British Interplanetary Society, had actual scientific knowledge. And so he was the one that Kubrick reached out to, because he wanted to make something that was grounded in reality, but was also asking some big questions. And all Kubrick had is, I want to make a good science fiction movie, maybe about a trip to the moon and then to Mars. And they hole up in Kubrick's apartment and try and figure it out. And they end up reaching out to different interplanetary societies. I think maybe they talked to NASA, or at least to some NASA fanboys. And Kubrick was obsessed with the 1964 World's Fair and this exhibit called The Home of the Future. And they just ended up putting together all this stuff to try and be as accurate as possible about space travel, about what the future would look like. They did venture into extreme abstraction when they wanted to talk about what an alien intelligence would look like. That's where they actually did base a lot of things on LSD and psychedelics. Those guys were both super squares. They didn't do any LSD, but there was a lot of LSD literature at the time. A man named Timothy Leary was one of the great advocates of LSD and psychedelics. Of course, we have the hippie revolution going on right now. This is 1968 or maybe mid 60s as they're working up to it. But the one thing that people who take LSD say is you touch God. I mean, that's just like, that's in the literature. And so a lot of what is the ending, a lot of what comprises the end of this movie is based on the experiences that people who take these hallucinogenic drugs comprises. And that's interesting to note, because that stuff's really big right now, especially in the kind of conservative social media world, there's a lot of people who are ostensibly our allies in things like abortion and free speech and stuff like that, that are big proponents of reaching the divine or reaching transcendence or something like that through the use of these mind-expanding, consciousness-expanding drugs. And this movie is very much rooted in those experiences, even though, again, neither of its two authors were willing to go out on a limb and actually have an experience like that. They were only willing to read the literature and base their stuff on it. So, but this movie does, for all that you can look back and say, well, 2001 didn't exactly feel like the movie. If you're an idiot, you can say things like that. This movie gets more things right than it gets wrong. I mean, it has tablet computers. It has people jogging in space. There's stuff that, like, it's easy to notice the stuff it gets wrong because it sticks out. The stuff that it gets right, you just kind of assume, well, that's obvious. We see that all the time. Like, you don't even think of it as being innovative or interesting because it's just like you're used to seeing images of astronauts jogging in space. But people weren't used to seeing images of astronauts jogging in space back then. Kubrick and Clark had to surmise that that's what they would do. So this movie actually gets a ton of stuff right. It's also just one of those things where did it predict it or did it create it? Because a lot of just the whole design of how we live now, Apple design, I should say, like sleek modernist kind of futurist design comes from 2001. So Futura typeface, everything that goes into making Apple look like Apple is coming out of the aesthetic of movies like 2001. And Kubrick really wanted to create an aesthetic of the future, and he did. And the future, some of the future has actually been derived by that. In the same way that people say our tablet computers are based around what people thought looked cool in Minority Report more than what would actually work. You know, if you've read those articles, 2001 is kind of the same thing. Like it used Futura type sans serif typefaces, and therefore when Steve Jobs wanted to make his technology feel kind of cool in space age, he used those typefaces, and now that's what we think of as cool in space age, and nifty new technology uses those kinds of typefaces. So Kubrick makes this movie, releases it to much derision, and then within a year it's caught on and people love it, and the critical establishment very quickly comes around on it, and it becomes hailed as a classic sci-fi movie. The moon landing happens and everybody watches it on grainy, nasty little 13-inch TVs in black and white. Meanwhile, you have this expansive space movie that's in bold color and on a big screen and feels really realistic, and it plays for a long time and is hugely influential.
Okay, so Ben, are you ready to talk your way through
you know it.
this film?
Yes, I anticipated what you were going to say because I was in another dimension, Ethan.
You were?
Yeah.
Was it a dimension of...
That's why I could answer you before you finished.
Seeing like drone footage of Arizona that has like a video filter over it?
How did you know that? Are you in the other dimension with me?
That's what other dimensions look like according to 2001.
What in the world?
Oh, man, I'm always disappointed by a little bit of the Stargate. I mean, how could you make the Stargate live up to everything that it has to live up to by the time you get to it? But
I don't know.
And a lot of it's actually pretty cool and does have that transcendent feeling. But then there are those really, now at least, corny shots, I think, of...
Yeah.
We're getting way ahead of ourselves.
We are, but I think that we should. This film maybe can let us get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we're jumping through time. We're going through our own Stargate.
That's right. And if you haven't seen this movie yet, listener, sorry, it will be more confusing for you. But if you have, you'll know what we're talking about. So I would say that all of those filter drone shots you're talking about, they do look, I guess, corny. But
I mean, we have... what is it, 40, 50 years of film now, so it feels like an 80s music video. Or so it's like we've seen, I've had devices that have let me apply that filter, like just push a button and suddenly that filter.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking too. But what I respect is that it's just more hardcore when Kubrick does it.
Yes.
He just keeps going and going and going and going and going. And I like that he's just, that sequence is all about, it's not just about what the guy is seeing. It's about how his mind can't actually process what he's seeing. And so he's rendering it in terms of landscapes that he understands.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do, especially at that pitch
Yeah.
of expression. Like, here's something that's beyond the human mind to visualize. Let me visualize it for you. Well, you're gonna push it. Do the best you can with images, and then later images that rely on your images are going to make people think that what you did was corny.
Yeah, I don't know what else you would do. It is one of those things that's just like you are trying to express the inexpressible. And I'm trying to think of similar things. I can't name the movie, but like for example, in what's that Star Wars movie with the Rian Johnson one, Last Jedi, when he's teaching Rey about the Force, and he's saying like it is in every molecule, and he's kind of getting at this idea of a transcendent life force. And you have these shots of like worms in the ground and grass growing real fast, and this kind of cool montage. It's a very weird, atypical Star Wars thing. I don't know if you even remember it. You might not if you only saw the movie once when it was
weird. No, I don't remember this, and I would think that I would, because I like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of other things like that.
Sure. Here's one. Actually, this just popped into my head. If you were gonna, I don't know that anyone does, but some people are big fans of The Fountain by Darren Aronofsky.
Sure.
That is a similarly, well, it's not quite as ambitious, and it's ambitious and it's about different things.
Yeah.
In fact, it's not about technology, actually, but it's about transcendence,
right,
for sure. And I don't think it's as good a movie, but it is ambitious and visually ambitious, and tries to give you all of these weird abstract ideas through montage and stuff.
I've never seen it. I've been kind of out on the whole Aronofsky thing since Requiem for a Dream, which was a movie that hit me like a ton of bricks when I was a certain age.
Right, which I never saw, and I'm happy to never have seen it, and never will.
I mean, if you want to see how terrible drugs are, then that movie makes sure you understand how terrible drugs are.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like Aronofsky.
Yeah. In any case.
Yeah. In any case, The Fountain.
Yeah, The Fountain. The other thing I'm thinking of that sort of relates just in terms of actually achieving a pitch of transcendence for a few minutes at least are certain sequences in good old Terry Malick's Tree of Life. I'm thinking particularly of the Lacrimosa sequence with, I guess it's the creation of the universe or something like that. But you see all this big cosmic stuff.
Yeah, which is a gorgeous sequence.
It's a gorgeous sequence, and the music, he chose a piece of modern classical music that really does a lot of heavy lifting.
Arvo Pärt, I think.
Yeah.
Bulgarian or Lithuanian. Sorry, I don't know what nationality Arvo Pärt is.
Yeah,
I guess I could find out.
Some European something or other. But yeah, you see images of these big cosmic kind of ink blotty kind of
Estonian.
That's right. I knew it was something like that.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know why I even brought that up, except for just there's another guy trying to do something that cosmic, and maybe that's the most successful one that I've seen actually in terms of plugging me into something.
Well, Tree of Life back in the day was a movie I saw like probably 4 or 5 times. Loved it. Would have called it maybe my favorite movie. Now, I don't know. I might someday, I imagine I'll go back to it, but I feel like I kind of outgrew it, and who knows?
I think it's easy to outgrow, especially because of, well, this is not a Tree of Life podcast, but that beach scene, heaven at the end, is so lame.
I really like that beach scene.
I know.
Sorry.
I do too, but I think there's something pretty wrong with it. Like, it's pretty immature ultimately.
Yeah. Okay. You're probably right. I guess we shouldn't try to litigate this now.
If you want to make your one Tree of Life point before we move on,
no, I'm good. I'm good.
Folks, maybe one day we will do a podcast on Tree of Life. Would you like that? Tell us.
I think I would like that.
Yeah, I think I would too. But if listeners are like, what? Tree of Life? Yes. Then of course we'll do it. So if you dropped your phone because you're so excited about the idea of us doing Tree of Life.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I'll say about Tree of Life is that for all that it's abstract and stuff, it is way easier to parse than 2001.
Yeah, Tree of Life, like you by
Tree
the end
of Life
of it,
explains everything. And if you're not like a film nerd, you may not think it explains everything. But if you pay attention, if you treat his visuals, Terrence Malick's visuals, his images like I'm explaining to you what I'm thinking in the progression of the theme with this image. Then I'm going to explain it with that image. You realize he's actually, in that sense, he's very, we could say, prosy, actually.
Yeah.
Like, here's an image of despair. Kubrick is not that simple.
Yeah, Terrence Malick is like one of those poems that you read in high school where it's like, there is one layer of meaning that like, oh, the raven means death. Like you do have to make that one connection, but once you've made it, you understand the entire poem. Yeah. Whereas Kubrick is more like one of those poems where, and I don't know what poet this would be, but you look at it like a T.S. Eliot or something. You read it and you're like, I understand all these words and I understand the images that they're conjuring, but I have no idea why he put all these together or what it's supposed to all add up to, except for when I hear something like, I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Right. It evokes a feeling.
Actually, that might be, I think that might be a good comparison. Because Eliot, no comparison is perfect. Eliot's actually a little easier than Kubrick because I would say, Eliot, you can always understand his mood.
Right.
whatever that flavor is, even if you can't name it, you're like, okay, I kind of get what you feel. What you want me to feel. Kubrick, I think, is the same, but Kubrick is colder than Eliot.
He's more of an intellectual and less of a...
And it's more like Kubrick wants to be distant from his own humanity, which I think we can talk about.
Yeah, well, we will get to the part where we talk about those great characters, Dave and Frank.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be a good place to talk about it. Yeah. You don't actually know always what you're supposed to feel during 2001. I mean, I guess you're supposed to feel some grandeur and awe of some type, but there's places where the movie seems to be intentionally making you feel less, holding you back, not letting you just enter into it in the same way that another filmmaker. If you want a really instructive comparison point, it's not a great movie, but AI by Steven Spielberg, where he took Kubrick's notes and script and made his idea of a Kubrick movie. And
so unlike a Kubrick movie.
And it's so unlike a Kubrick movie, even though you can imagine, you wouldn't have to change the script at all, I don't think, to have a Kubrick movie. It's just that Spielberg is such a warm, humanist filmmaker who plugs you into the emotions of his characters that it's just like, it doesn't feel anything like the way that Stanley Kubrick would actually do it.
I always hated AI for that reason.
I hated it too, and I especially hated the ending, because it seems so wonky and sentimental to me. He gets to spend one last day with his mom or whatever. And then I read a treatise of some type that said, and sorry, folks, this podcast is all over the place. We're going to get into 2001 in 2 seconds. I read a treatise that says that actually AI is the most brutally mean and depressing movie of all time. You've got this broken little robot boy who just wants love, and these aliens in their weird, cold, experimental way are going to bring back his mom for one day, and then he's going to spend eternity mourning her. This is
Doesn't he die? They shut him off.
He kind of goes to sleep or something like that. But they were just like, this is not, there's nothing. Spielberg might have some lilting piano music that makes you feel kind of sentimental to you, but this is a really cold, nasty.
Well, it sounds to me like that treatise is correct about Kubrick's take, but I don't know if Spielberg knew that.
Yeah, like I said, it would be an interesting counterpoint, but we've got to talk about 2001.
All right.
So we start with the alignment of the planets, this credit sequence, the famous Thus Spoke Zarathustra, who wrote Richard Strauss piece. Dun, 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 dun.
Boom, 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 boom.
And that's one of those things where it's like, a billion commercials, a billion parodies, you have heard this music so many times, and it's always been used in kind of a faux grandeur sort of a way.
Yeah.
Like, oh, bum, 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 it's a new cell phone from Verizon.
That's right. It's a new taco from Taco Bell.
Right.
I mean, it's
exactly
that kind of thing.
Right. This taco is galactically good. And it's just like, so I guess my question for you, Ben, is, does this opening, it's just an opening shot, and I think it's supposed to really just like blow you away and root you in this movie, and given how far special effects have come, and given how much this music has been co-opted, which Kubrick co-opted it, but as many critics have pointed out, Kubrick is one of the only filmmakers who can choose a piece of source music and then actually elevate it Like, I think Roger Ebert in his review says, think about the William Tell Overture and think about how you can't listen to it without thinking of the Lone Ranger, and think about how much Hollywood always ruins these pieces of music. And then think about the fact that Kubrick is one of the only filmmakers who chooses and popularizes pieces of classical music and sort of elevates them so that your frame of reference for them is actually bigger and more expansive than it would have been if it wasn't for Kubrick. Like, in a sense, he did Strauss a favor by associating his movie with the planets, and then it's not Kubrick's fault that it became associated with galactic tacos. But my question for you is, does the scene still do anything for you? Does it work? Does it have any kind of grandeur? Watching it on your TV all these years down the road, and all these cultural associations down the road,
and not just on my TV. I think it's because I don't know what it is, but something between the interface of the older DVD and the older DVD player and the somewhat newer TV means that in order for me to watch the full image, it occupies like it's shrunk down to a small part of my TV screen, and I could make it fill the screen by zooming in and missing a ton of the frame, which what is the point if you're going to bother watching something like this and treat it as though it's art? So anyway, so that's just to say I was watching this tiny version of this film in part of my television with my wife. And anyway, so the answer is kind of, but I can't tell you if it's because it's doing something or because I can imagine it. I've seen enough movies that I can reconstruct what it was like. I'm not really sure. I see that it has integrity as a thing. Like, it's a good idea and it's special. Obviously, we've had so many things like that are more visually impressive, at least in terms of their visual effects and stuff, that it's just hard to put yourself all the way back there. So kind of.
I like what it's doing. I like that sort of abacus effect of the planets all aligned like that.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. The idea that as film connoisseurs, we actually reconstruct these things or construct them in our brains, like it's sort of as almost an intellectual exercise. Like, this isn't actually evoking awe right now, but I can imagine the feeling of awe enough that I get it and I like it and I respect it. And I can imagine seeing if this was re-released on IMAX or something and I went and saw it there, and I was thinking this for the whole Stargate sequence and everything leading up to it too, I'm sure it still plays like gangbusters if you just go to a big screen and really give yourself to it. And I have had the experience, as I'm sure you have, of seeing some of these things. Like, I saw Metropolis with a live organ score. And Metropolis, you watch it now and it's pretty, it's cool. It's really cool, but also it's 100 years old now and change, I think. And it's just not exactly like something new. But you go and you watch it with an organ on a big screen, and it does have a kind of raw, real elemental power.
I could believe that.
And I think King Kong climbing up that skyscraper, I once saw on IMAX. I saw one of those 40-minute IMAX documentaries. It was on special effects, but it started with an IMAX version of Kong fighting the planes, and it was awesome. It was really and they didn't spruce it up. It was just claymation Kong fighting those silly planes, but it was just so big and the sound was all around you, and it really had some kind of raw power. And speaking of raw power, we are now going into the most rawly powerful section of all cinema, the dawn of man.
All right.
The planet of the ape suits. What do you think about this sequence, Ben?
Well, let's see. It's hard to watch.
You mean like it's boring, or?
Well, it's not just boring. It's like ugly. It's like, yeah, this is your version of what men are. It's a thumb in God's eye. I think it's just so hostile to God.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, you guys think we're made in God's image. We're just nasty, stupid animals. I don't think you really realize I don't know. It's easy to forget the hostility of evolution and an evolutionary perspective, and the stupidity, and it's a boring perspective too. It's boring to watch these dumb apes evolve. And so it just, I don't know, it's all tainted by that feeling. It's like, oh, this guy hates me. Well, he hates himself. He hates God, especially.
I think Chesterton said, perhaps in The Everlasting Man, that we are moderns are so stupid because we're willing to accept a miracle as long as it goes really, 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 really monotonously slow. Like the miracle of an ape turning into a man is a miracle no matter how you cast it. And he's like, you read Genesis and God just took some dirt and he made a man. And everyone's like, I don't believe that. But as long as you make it go really, 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 really slow, they're like, yay!
That's really funny. That's a great observation.
It was, well, yeah.
I think I've heard that, but I'd forgotten it. So.
One of Chesterton. That guy had a few good observations. I don't know.
He did.
But yeah, it's interesting because I agree with you. I do think it's boring. I do think it's hostile. I think the idea that what made man is tools, basically, and tools to dominate each other and other species with is a pretty mean, small. I mean, even if you're going to tell the story of a monkey becoming a man, how about it's like he's reaching for the stars and he climbs a mountain? There's got to be something better than he figures out how to use a bone to smash another monkey.
Yeah.
It's like, so, and that's all man ever is a monkey smashing another monkey.
Right.
And yet I do have a certain sense of, I don't want to say awe, that's too much, but I like stories set in the primordial sort of past. I sometimes enjoy caveman stories. There's a collection of 3 short stories or novellas or whatever by the sci-fi author Gene Wolfe, who we both respect a lot, even though he's weird and crazy and sometimes can be pretty perverse.
Yeah.
But his first collection is called what? I can't pull the title right now.
The Fifth Head of Cerberus.
The Fifth Head of Cerberus. And the most famous story in there is actually not the one that...
The title story.
The title story is great, but then there's this middle story that's just set in this...
alien planet.
This crazy primordial alien planet where there's just this kind of caveman-like figure going over this barren landscape, and there's another planet kind of hovering in the sky that he can look up at, and there's these weird stars, and
there's like aliens and some kind of demon stuff.
Right,
and
there's a monster that he may or may not change places with at the end. It's really crazy. It's impossible to describe if you haven't read it.
Yeah, it is crazy.
But I love it. It might be my favorite sci-fi story, actually, one of my favorite fantasy stories. It just has that feeling of sort of ancient, transcendent awe kind of stuff. And we just watched together over the July 4th weekend, we watched The Good Dinosaur, which is a very weird movie with like Western rustlers, dinosaurs and stuff like that.
That's really weird.
But it also does have a little bit of that like primordial dinosaurs in a world before man. And I find myself responding to that for some reason. And I'm like, what am I responding to? Because I don't believe that that's actually an accurate view of history. I don't believe that that sort of thing ever actually existed, at least the way it's shown in these kinds of properties. But there must be something there. I mean, there's something that in my sort of Jungian unconsciousness, I do. Yeah, I am like, they're touching something. So what are they touching?
Well, I think they're touching, what was it like for man to realize everything is new and I have to figure it out? What was it like for Adam?
Yeah.
What these movies don't have is they don't have God there, so that Adam would know who and what he was.
Right.
Instantly, from the first moment of creation, even as he realized, whoa, I'm new. I'm Adam. I'm a man. He could know that because he knew who God was. Like Calvin says, knowledge of God starts with knowledge of ourselves, and knowledge of ourselves starts with knowledge of God, and you can't really extricate the two. Well, that's what the first conscious man would have been like, and that's what the development would have been like. But it still would have been different than what we have. We look back on centuries of men doing things in the world, but Adam didn't.
Right.
And his children didn't look back on, I guess they had some central events, obviously. Cataclysmic fall and the initial creation, but then everything else had not been done, and they created all this new technology.
Yeah, and they were standing on the precipice of like, this is the beginning of history. What shall we make with this world? There is that feeling that I'm sure they had. And after the fall, you do have the reality of mankind looking out at a hostile world and having to figure out how to navigate it. And so I guess there is actually a period of history that did happen that is not unlike some of these stories.
Yeah.
in their way,
Yeah.
but never as sort of groveling and animalistic as.
No.
It's like man was always man, and he always had dignity, and he always had a sense of his own dignity and a sense of his own ability to conquer nature, even at great cost. It's like you read Genesis, and it's like they're making tools, they're making instruments, they're building civilization quickly. Actually, it's not just like how do I outrun the leopard, the primordial leopard creature to get my pelt by the fire kind of thing.
Well, I will give this to Kubrick. So my wife is making this observation to me about that sequence, which she really hated more than me.
Don't blame her.
Yeah, but it is true that one of the first things, in the first brotherly relationship there was, one of them killed his brother, probably using some kind of a tool.
Yeah.
And so that urge to dominate as soon as sin entered. And then it's Cain's descendants who, here, I'm just going to go to Genesis 4 here. Yeah, Cain, so Genesis 4:17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built the city, so the first city is a Canaanite, right? Or a Cainite, I guess I should say, not Canaan, Cain. When he built the city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. And then Lamech gives his little poem or saying about how I kill people when they make me mad. I avenge myself a lot more than Cain did.
Right.
And so you have this connection between technology and violence.
Right.
Right there.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating.
That is fascinating. And it's probably one of the reasons that we watch a movie like this and we respond to it. We might reject it intellectually, but there is still something that we're like, that's getting at something. Like it's not just a crazy person. It's not like watching The Danish Girl or something, a movie about trans something or other where you're just like, well, I don't agree with any of the premises of this movie and therefore I feel nothing and get nothing out of it besides disgust. It's like you're pretty connected to, even if you're bored by it, you're like, I get what this is telling me a story or sending out a signal that I can pick up, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And yet I still do resent the whole sort of idea of this movie. He crushes the monkey's skull with a bone and throws it up in the air, and then it becomes a space thing, and it's like technology. And then it's like the whole theme of the movie is technology has always been a double-edged sword. It allows us to do wonders, and it also allows us to give in to our worst impulses.
Well, yeah, even in every part of the movie, technology is all a tool of domination. Even the way that Dr. Haywood he's gonna give his speech, which is to the scientists, which is just, nope, shut up. Like, this is, we're gonna do everything with this we need to do to have power. And the American flag is standing in the background. That it's very subtle, but it's very clear that Kubrick is thinking of nations use technology to wield power.
Especially when you combine it with the scene of him sitting down with the other people before he goes into the conference, and they're like, "Can you give us some information, Dr. Haywood?" And he's like, "Well, sorry, old chap." I guess he's not British, but they just like, "No,
that's right.
I'm not at liberty to talk about that."
That's right.
Yeah, which okay, technology is a double-edged sword, but there is something perhaps post-mill in me that wants to say, like, God told us to fill the earth and subdue it. Like, I don't think a movie like this that quite captures it. Yes, of course, man is depraved, and therefore anything that we do is going to come with a cost in sin and in brokenness. And yet the tools that we build ourselves are good, and they are a blessing from God. And the cities that we build ourselves are good. And the New Jerusalem is going to be a city. It's not, what we're not doing is working our way back towards some sort of Edenic paradise that's just devoid of technology, devoid of earth subduing, devoid of tools. That was never God's purpose from the beginning of creation, and it wasn't his purpose after the fall. And so while Kubrick does get at something about man's depravity and about the corruption of our tools, I think even that I resent his atheistic, cynical paganism.
Well, I think Kubrick would say that Kubrick would be more like a Pastor Stu, in my opinion. From our Ville show, listener, if you haven't listened to that, Pastor Stu's a villain. But Pastor Stu's all about embracing your inner darkness. And I feel like Kubrick believes that to some extent.
Yeah.
Embrace your inner darkness. And that's how you transcend it.
Yeah.
Transcend it is you embrace it.
Yeah, well, what he almost might do is say the whole construct of inner darkness is the wrong one, because it's actually, there are bigger forces that are beyond our conceptions of good or evil that are at work, and that's what we really have to understand about our existence. I mean, the monolith, I guess we can talk about it because it's showing up about where we're talking about.
Yeah.
It is this impersonal force of transcendence, of growth, of evolution, it shows up every time man's supposed to take the next step. And I suppose it represents God or some kind of vastly superior
alien intelligence
intelligence.
Depositing its own technology.
Right.
Which begs the question, to what ends?
Right.
Why? What do these aliens want?
Right. And the movie has I don't think any interest in answering that question.
No, not at all. I bet Clark's book does.
Yeah, I wondered about that. You know Clark better than I have. You've actually read him.
Well,
I haven't.
I remember I read a little bit about the development of this movie, and I know that Clark wrote his book at the same time, basically, like as he and Kubrick were developing the screenplay. Clark was writing the book, and Kubrick was making the movie, or it's some form of that.
Right.
And the book is just going to explain everything, because that's Clark.
Right.
Clark's going to explain most everything, and Kubrick is not. And I think the plots diverge some, partly because of that. But I feel sure that Kubrick is just going to, well, the reason that the aliens did it was this, and they did this and that, and monoliths.
That's what Clark was.
I'm just sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Clark is so, again, I like this word, prosy.
Mm-hmm.
Clark is not interested in like artistically not hiding things from you.
Yeah.
He's just going to tell you,
yeah,
like the plot reasons in a very maybe boring way.
Well, one of the things that Clark said about working with Kubrick is we would often reach a compromise. Stanley's. And so
that's really funny.
Which is, I think, what a lot of people would say about working with Kubrick.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I imagine he probably did just go and put whatever his opinion was into the novel, because he wasn't going to get anything by Kubrick that Kubrick wasn't interested in. It is fascinating to me that Kubrick as a creator, and that pagans in general would, and this is, I suppose, is a very broad statement. It applies to many of the world's great religions. People really like the idea of an impersonal creator. Like they respond to that. And as a Christian, it's hard for me to wrap my head around what's appealing about that. Like the entire thing that I love about the actual God, our God, is that he is our Father and he is person.
Can I just say relationships are messy?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to be crass towards our God, who is the absolute person, but you have to deal with his judgment seat.
Right.
And an impersonal creator is like a relief. I mean, it's like evil and stupid, and
it's a horrible Lovecraftian. It's like I'd rather be smashed in the gears of an impersonal deity. Like if I have a choice, I'd rather be ground to dust by something that's impersonal, that just does what it does
and doesn't care about me
and doesn't care one way or another, than have to face the personality of an actual God and his wrath and judgments, which is just it does make sense, and it is where a lot of people are, but it is when you think about it that way, it's such a nihilistic.
It is pure rebellion.
Yeah.
In its conception.
Yeah.
It's running from everything we know to be true about ourselves, about our creator. But there you have it.
Yeah. Well, anything else to say about the monolith before I think it is just impersonal agency of
some other force.
It's just
some transcendent force.
Some transcendent force. Yeah. And it's very intentional that it is such a boring symbol. I mean, it's a wonderful symbol, but it's like there's no personality to it. It does not look like anything. It's just a black rectangle.
Yeah, it is amazing. The only thing it does, being a rectangle and not a square, being upright and not flat, is it points up.
Mm-hmm.
It points up and out.
Right. And oftentimes it'll be framed with the sun or some other symbol of transcendence and the divine framed behind it or kind of absorbed into it or coming out of it or whatever.
That's right. Until the final sequence where it's spinning and flying through space as though to indicate this is the final journey. Like there's no up anymore, like you're here. And that's the point at which the astronaut enters the Stargate, and now we're getting ahead of ourselves, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it's hard not to come back to that Stargate, just like Dave. It's hard not to come back to the Stargate.
Just like me, it's hard not to come back to the movie Stargate with Kurt Russell, which for a time was like my favorite movie as a teenager.
We've all traveled through that chaotic
Stargate.
piece of transcendence and found ourselves old and wasted in an empty house. Yeah. I will say, I wish more Christian filmmakers or filmmakers that handle biblical stories would take a page out of Kubrick's portrayal of the divine. Like, I would actually love it if the Ten Commandments drew as much of a veil around transcendence as Kubrick does. Like, he's like, actually, I can't show you a superior intelligence. I can't conceive of a superior intelligence because I'm just a normal intelligence. Like, there's a certain amount of humility that Kubrick has in that in a weird way. It's like, I can't, and I know they tried as for the final creepy house scene at the end, post Stargate, before Dave becomes the Star Child. They did want to have an alien, and they just were like, we can't wrap our heads around how to portray superior intelligence. All we can do is show a monolith. We can't pull the veil back on that.
Right. You compare it to Spielberg's Close Encounters.
Yeah.
I don't know. Spielberg is just going to be, you could say, crass. Oh, sure, here's the aliens. They're like you, except they're different. But they're basically just people.
Yeah. I mean, Close Encounters never should have had the aliens get out of the ship or shown them. I think the proper way to do Close Encounters, in my humble opinion, and a number of hit blockbuster movies made by me, 0, number made by Spielberg, many, but is to have the ships come down, have the doors open up, have the light spill out, have our characters all go ooh and ah, and then not really go from there, because there is actually something disappointing about seeing the aliens. Like, they can never be as cool and transcendent and otherly as you actually want them.
Although Spielberg gets something when the little one comes out, and there's something.
If anybody's going to do it, it's him.
Oh, I hate that movie.
I'd much prefer 2001
Yeah.
to that. I mean, at least 2001 knows it's being cold and anti-human. Close Encounters thinks it's being humanistic. All right, that monkey's he's been inspired by superior intelligence. He's gonna beat that other monkey to death. Thus spoke the Zarathustra play again. Yeah. Nietzsche, of course, wrote the book Thus Spake Zarathustra, based on an old prophet, Zoroaster or Zarathustra. And Nietzsche is all about the Uberman becoming something more, becoming the Superman, becoming. So there's a lot of Nietzschean ideas in this movie, and that piece of music is an intentional nod to that, I think. Yep. So now we're going into one of the most famous sequences from the movie, the Balloon to Noob scene. The place where a lot of people, I think, probably these days check out completely. They've made it through the monkeys. It's like, okay, every movie has to have a boring intro, but now we get to the plot. No, you don't. Plot's not coming for a while. First, we've got to see the dance of these spaceships, the cosmic irony of a waltz. But it's not two waltzers in a ballroom. It's spaceships waltzing around a planet or something like that. I don't know. What do you think about this sequence, Ben?
I kind of love it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I basically do.
Just as a piece of cinema?
Yeah, I think it's very effective. It's very beautiful. I mean, if you're in the wrong mood, you'll just be bored.
Yeah.
I don't deny it, but I was in the right mood, and I was like, it's very precisely choreographed. It's a very slow dance, but it's successful. It's good musically. It's good visually. It's cool. It's interesting enough to watch different things in space move, and then go into the ship and watch the pen have its own little rotation in the air.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of scenes in this movie and in Kubrick's oeuvre in general where it feels like he's just looking at us with a malicious God's eye view, like we're ants under a telescope. Or ants under a telescope.
That's great.
Ants under.
Yes. I think that's the name of our new book on Kubrick.
Yes. Ants under a telescope. Ants under a microscope, and it's just kind of this dispassionate. But there is also the grandeur of a God's eye view of, hey, actually, planets are waltzing around each other and spaceships are waltzing around each other. And there is something beautiful about that.
Yeah.
Actually, it's all a dance. And this scene gets at that. I just also think there's something tactile about it, like that you watch season 2 of The Mandalorian and you're just not in touch with the fact that traveling through space would be big and cool and wonderful. And it's just nice to spend some time. It's one of the things that I find insulting about Interstellar. They're like, hey, we need to go to Jupiter and fix humanity's problems. And then you just cut to the spaceship and they're like halfway there or something. Like, no, I want to see like spaceshipy stuff. I want to feel like I'm on the spaceship. I don't just want to cut to the middle of it. And all the hands and music in the world can't connect me to that if the movie doesn't actually just spend some time there, even if it is monotonous.
Right.
And there are sections like the water planet where they lose all the years and stuff like that I like of Interstellar, but I'm not, maybe I am an Interstellar hater. I was pretty disappointed by that movie, but we're not here to litigate Interstellar. I don't know. And how many movies do you watch where people go to the jungle and it just doesn't feel sweaty, or where they fire guns and you just don't smell the sulfur? It's like, I like movies that put you in touch with something in a tactile way, and just spending some time with, well, the stewardess has to walk really slowly and there's the guy and he's fallen asleep and his pen is floating and she's going to put it back for him. Stuff like that really put you in touch with what this sort of space age world would be. And I like that. So we've got this big section with what's his name? Dr. Haywood Smith. I think Haywood Smith is a comedian. I don't know, anything you want to say that we haven't already said about the plot kind of stuff here, or the world building kind of stuff here?
No, I don't think so. That Dr. Haywood Floyd.
Haywood Floyd, yeah.
No, I guess not.
I like the design. I mean, I think it's cool. Although that style of design, whatever it's called, is really uncomfortable for someone as big as I am. Like, I would not be happy in the world of 2001 because those chairs just wouldn't be very comfortable for me. So
yeah,
it's kind of like, I like sparse, modernist design, but
I do not. But
I enjoy it, but I wouldn't want to live in any of these spaces.
Yeah.
And I don't think those people would too, because in this future, they'll have greater bone density and better nutrition, and they'll grow taller and bigger, and they won't want to sit on weird red Art Deco chairs.
Look like balloon animals.
That look like balloon animals. Yes, exactly.
I don't know. I think the style of the people, not the style of their clothes, but the style of the characters, like the way that they talk. It's like a 60s TV show.
Yes, it is.
And I think Kubrick knew that, and he was like, I'll let the actors act just enough that you basically believe that they're people. But also, the whole mode of everything they do is going to be in the style of a 60s television show where everything's a little unnatural and artificial. Just very deliberate, the way. The only people who aren't like that are the foreigners that Dr. Haywood talks with very briefly. And it's weird that he did that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know if he's saying that's what... He feels very much in control of it. It does feel like a stylistic choice. I watched a few clips, not from like the scary stuff, but just the setup stuff of The Shining, where Jack Nicholson's touring the hotel and stuff. I just wanted to remember some of that stuff going into this. And it actually has a lot of that weirdness to it. And again, it feels very intentional. The guy's like, I do hope that it won't scare you to be in a hotel where a man murdered his family. And Jack Nicholson's like, as for my wife, she'll be absolutely fascinated. She's a confirmed horror film addict or something. And it's like Jack Nicholson already has a weird Jack Nicholson delivery, but then there's something kind of corny and stilted about the way it's written and the way it's performed on both ends. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it is just Kubrick not understanding people and choosing those takes, but
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think he wants to put you at a weird, ironic angle to what's going on. And I don't know exactly what's going through his head in some of the choices he's making, but he wants to dehumanize everything, and maybe that's not the word, but
I think you may be right. It's all the people who are in power who are the coldest.
Right.
Like Dr. Haywood Floyd, like his daughter is sweet and seems like a real little girl, an actual little girl that they just happened to film somehow.
Right.
And then in that one video call where he talks with her, and then he's like, I don't know, he's just like almost a normal guy-ish, but colder, colder, but colder than the foreigners, and then Dave and Frank.
Good old Dave and Frank, yes. American heroes, or whatever they are.
And that one call with Dave's parents is so weird.
Yeah.
It's so like unnatural. And they're the ones who have the dominant technology, and who Dave's gonna eject Frank into space so that he can get back in.
Yeah.
Which, on some level he doesn't like, even with as much acting as Kubrick lets him give, but also he's just gonna make all these cold, calculated decisions.
Yeah, it's like the thing that Gene Roddenberry and his successors have wanted to romanticize, the kind of cold, scientific, prime directive Star Trek. We're all working for the greater good, and all of humanity's problems have been solved, and all disease. So now we just go around and benevolently kind of impose our will on the universe in a way that we pretend like it's not imposing our will on the universe, because it's all very liberal. It's like Kubrick is actually portraying the same kind of world, but he's got a much more cynical angle on it. He's like, yeah, these people are all kind of stilted and weird and tamped down, and it's almost like they're living in Soviet Russia or something like that. Like they're all kind of speaking a code or using a language that they don't quite understand. Like they've all been taught to talk this way, to act this way.
They've all been taught to dominate or be dominated.
Yeah.
And it's been successful. Whoever has the bone, just submit.
Right. Yeah. And I think The Shining is actually similar. It's like we have all these people who have been basically possessed by the hotel, and they're just like, well, Mr. Torrance, let me show you around. We've got 12 hunks of meat, and you'll never have to eat the same. They just all kind of feel like puppets, and it adds to the creepy ambiance of the movie. But it does exist in a kind of weird cartoonish, which you actually made me think of when you pointed that out, was early Coen Brothers films like Raising Arizona or stuff.
Yeah.
Or not Big Lebowski, the one with Paul Newman, Hudsucker Proxy.
Oh yeah.
Where it's just like,
I hate Hudsucker Proxy.
Why are these people talking like this? What world is this? Who says things like this? Like, who are these people? And eventually you realize, oh, they just live in some weird Coen Brothers universe where everybody talks like that and acts like that.
And is it comedy? Is it drama? Is it cynical? Is it
do they
cheerful?
Love these people? Do they hate these people?
Yes.
Yes.
The answer is yes,
Yes
to all those questions.
Right. And I think Kubrick is similar here in a subtler way.
Yeah.
Do you like the fact that we never really get a clear summation of the plot? I mean, I guess Dr. Haywood Floyd basically tells us what we should know, but then we're going to cut to the Jupiter mission, and it's going to take a while to kind of, we're going to have to get the details from his parents' stupid birthday message or from the newscast that they see some. It's like
That's right.
We're never just going to have somebody say, let me lay this all out for you.
Yeah. No, I don't mind. I don't mind at all. It makes the movie more interesting. It's just the movie doing all it can to signal to you, I don't care about this exactly. I mean, I care in the sense that you have to know enough for me to hang this on, but
right.
It's just not about.
Well, and it's if you want to see why people like me and Ben sometimes look down our noses a little bit at somebody like Christopher Nolan, it's because of this. Because he aspires to this kind of thing, and people are like, yes, he builds a perfect puzzle box. But then you watch Inception, which is a good movie. I like Inception, but it's just like, so...
It is incredibly over-explained.
Yeah, it's just like, let me lay out the rules of what it is to be in a dream. Now let me repeat the rules of what it is to be a dream. Now let me give you, like, the whole first half of that movie is just Ellen Page or Thomas Hardy or whoever the exposition dump person is, just like explaining and explaining and explaining and explaining. And at a certain point, that takes away from the whole wonder of being able to do a dream heist. I want dream heists to feel a little dreamy. And if there's too many rules, and too much explanations, then it's not like a dream.
I mean, it's with Nolan, it's always going to be an engineer's version of a dream.
Yeah.
He's going to engineer. Kubrick engineered everything, but he engineered in a different way. He engineered he left as much to the intelligence of the viewer as he could.
Right.
in any movie of his you watch. It doesn't matter if you hate his movies or not. I think that's just true.
And he was very smart about what information he didn't give you. Like I always feel like he probably, in his engineerish way, does have the answers. Like he knows exactly who the monolith is. In The Shining, he knows, like, has Jack Nicholson been absorbed back into the hotel at the end? Has he gone into the past? We end on that weird photograph. It's like I think, is Danny seeing real visions? Like are these just visions or are these actual ghosts? Like I think Kubrick actually does have the answers to all those questions. Unlike some filmmakers who just wouldn't even know themselves, I think Kubrick does actually know every answer to every question. He's just very selective about what he wants to give us, and smart. I think he knows what will allow our imaginations the most play and enjoyment in terms of what he denies us. I mean, sometimes not giving the audience the answer is the better answer. And Christopher Nolan knew that in his most famous moment. It's no fun if the top falls down or if the top stays up. You just gotta cut away from it. Like the answer is, we don't know. That's the whole, and the answer is, who cares? Leonardo DiCaprio's made his own happiness, and if it's a dream, it's like, that's good. But Christopher Nolan has never been able to make himself do that ever again, even in places where he should have, like whether Batman's alive at the end of Dark Knight Rises, and snob, Christopher Nolan's terrible, etc., etc. All right, we're meeting Frank and Dave. Who's your favorite? Are you more of a Frank man or more of a Dave man? Dave, yeah.
Yeah, he's the one who survives.
Yeah, Frank Frank has my least favorite section in all of cinema, which is brilliant, but I just feel so claustrophobic where he's in that suit with the breathing and stuff like that, and it just goes on and on.
You mean when Hal kills him?
When Hal kills him.
Yeah.
Doesn't he go out twice? He goes out once or is it Dave? He goes out once to check out the satellite or whatever.
I think Dave goes out the first time and Hal the second, but no, that can't be right. I'm not sure.
I mean, they're such great, memorable characters. We really should be able to remember who did what. But
I bet it's Frank who goes out both times.
Yeah, I think it is Frank that goes out both times. But yeah. Would you like this movie better? Or would this be a better movie if Frank and Dave had some personality?
No, because they wouldn't fit in the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It just wouldn't make any sense. The whole movie would have to be a different movie for them to have more personality.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't be the one person that is a normal person in Raising Arizona or Hudsucker Proxy then you're just like, who is this person? What are they doing here? I think that's true. And I think we have to be willing for movies to do other things than thrill us in the same old narrative. Like, yeah, 90% of the time when I go and see a movie, it's because I want to see great characters have great dialogue, but I have to be willing for a movie to want to do something else. And this just happens to be an example of a movie that has no interest in doing that. It's not like it's trying to have great characters and failing, or trying to have great dialogue and failing. It's achieving exactly what it wants to. You may not like what it's achieving, but you shouldn't be like, well, Frank and Dave weren't very interesting. Kubrick failed.
Right.
Kubrick would be the first person to tell you that Frank and Dave aren't interesting.
Yeah, he doesn't want them to be interesting.
Exactly. But HAL 9000... he wants Hal to be interesting. He's got some sympathy for Hal. And I've got some sympathy for Hal. I love Hal. Forgive me for being so inquisitive, Frank. He's got that kind of evil butler energy. I really like
does.
it.
It's creepy.
It's pretty creepy.
It is Kubrick's sense of humor coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Kubrick loves the joke that the most human character and the one who gets the kind of an effective death scene is this stupid, monotonous computer program that may or may not have any kind of consciousness in the way that we understand it, which is another thing that he has no real interest in answering. I mean, is Hal human? Does it matter?
I think what's fun about Hal, of course, what's fun about all the AI stuff is not knowing exactly. It's a mystery. Like, what is it? It kind of gets to the mystery of what is it to be conscious,
right?
Anyway, and could we create another consciousness, another person? That's a sci-fi question that's writers have been dealing with for a long time.
As old as the hills. As old as the hills of Mars.
Silicon.
Yes.
As old as the hills of Silicon Valley.
Yes, exactly.
It's fun. And HAL is fun that way.
Yeah, it's a trope. Data from Star Trek and Johnny Five. I don't know if Johnny Five is actually a good example, but
I don't even know what that is.
not batteries not included. Did you ever see that?
Wow, yeah.
Classic.
I used to love that as a
Classic. It doesn't. Isn't his name Johnny Five?
kid. I have no idea.
I don't know. It's a terrible, terrible movie.
It really is.
But yeah, people love the whole robot sentient. The Terminator. Terminator 2 has a lot of fun with. Now I understand what it means to. I can't do an Arnold, but
now I know why you cry.
yeah. Man. Yeah, and I like that stuff. I think what I like about robot stories is the same thing that I like about Dorothy's friends in Wizard of Oz, the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and what's the other one? Cowardly Lion. It's like you can take these characters and strip away everything that's extraneous and just ask one question, like, what does it mean to be courageous? That's the only thing that's interesting about the lion is he's cowardly and he needs courage, and maybe he already has it, but there's no other real character. And what does it mean to have a heart? And what does it mean to have a brain?
Right.
It's like if you have these characters where you can kind of just take out all the other variables, and then you can kind of ask interesting questions. And as to whether maybe some Christians get tangled up in, well, could we actually create consciousness? The answer is no. But
right.
That doesn't mean it's not a fun. I mean, for me, it's just like, no. Okay, now I'm going to enjoy my sci-fi movie that's going to ask some fun questions surrounding that and not be bothered in the least by, although maybe I should be bothered because we live in a society that is increasingly crazy, postmodern, and transhumanist.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that creating consciousness, well, I'm not going to say consciousness, is creating programs or bots that mimic human consciousness it already does suck people in. I don't know if you read an article that I shared it to our Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Listener, if you want to be part of the Sound of Sanity Discord, which is that encompasses Sound of Sanity and Sanity at the Movies, and what else does it encompass? Anyway, it encompasses things.
Yeah.
What do you have to do, Nathan, to be part of that Discord?
I think that's over on patreon.com/Sound of Sanity to sign up there. Although maybe we should start a movies Discord for Sanity at the Movies. I've certainly thought about it. And
really?
If you're a fan of this podcast and you'd like that, then let us know. But
cool.
In any case, you posted this article.
I posted an article about how this guy was saying, well, it's and was it an article? It was a Twitter thread. That's right. It was a long Twitter thread that functions like an article.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying AI has failed, but what hasn't failed is that you can create, programs using human data, which a bajillion companies have been mining for years and years to figure out how do humans respond, how do they give emotional cues, what kind of things do they say to indicate to other people that they're people and that they're tracking. We could just have bots mimic that.
Right.
He's saying that's actually what's happening. It's not that you have a program that actually understands and has its own consciousness. You have a program that can mimic, though, based on a ton of human data and is always being fed fresh human data to keep up with the times.
Yeah.
And I think that's really creepy, and that's very plausible, and it makes sense to me that people would be sucked into that. And if you could talk with sort of a humanized machine puppet, right? Then you think of the forthcoming sex bot industry and all of the stuff. That just makes total sense to me.
Yeah, I think
that's creepy.
It's creepy. And then you read the transcript of the guy that got fired from Microsoft or Apple or whatever it was. Google, yeah. The guy who decided that a certain program had had achieved sentience. And you read his conversation with the program, and I was not convinced that the machine had achieved sentience, but
yeah, Lambda.
It is amazing how well it emulates human behavior and the kinds of stuff that it says. Like it is creepy.
Oh yeah,
it is creepy, and especially when you think about the ways that technology might be used to provide emotional satisfaction or sexual satisfaction to someone outside of the way that God created us to get those things. It's a profoundly dystopian and disturbing world that we live in, and it's probably only going to get worse.
Yeah. My read on HAL, just to go back to him, would be whether or not Kubrick has the idea that he did achieve consciousness. My idea would be he's made to learn, and what he learned was HAL is itself a product of technology, and it learned violence and domination.
Right.
And it decided that it was going to be the one on top.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And Hal also decided to remove the human element.
That's right.
And maybe Hal wasn't wrong. Of course he was in the morality of the world as God made it. But in Kubrick's morality, I'm not even sure that Hal was doing anything but protecting the mission. He actually got them there. Yes, Dave had to shut him down.
Okay, but here's the thing. I remember reading a film critic once. I think it was Alex Jones might have been his name.
Not Alex Jones, the
not
provocateur.
Not the provocateur, not the news guy, but a film critic guy who said he proposed an interpretation that Hal represents a stage that humans need to outgrow, a stage of just pure rationality that they need to get beyond. Like Hal is in some sense the logical progression of technology, but Hal's also a limiter.
Right.
And so dismantling Hal is actually a positive step, and that's what allows Dave to go on a voyage that Hal actually couldn't have for some reason. And I think that's interesting too.
Like the Hal is as far as we can get in our current iteration, but we need to dismantle Hal before we take the next leap into...
Yeah, what you need is more than a perfect chess machine.
Right.
And so I think that's a pretty interesting interpretation, actually.
I think it is. And it reminded me of, I think it's the first chapter of Orthodoxy, another great G.K. Chesterton book, where he talks about the irrationality of rationality. What he basically says is the sane man allows for things to be mysterious and unknown and even irrational in some sense. Like the sane man says, I don't understand God. I don't actually understand everything about the center of my universe and the universe. But because I'm willing to build a foundation there, I can build out from that rationally. Whereas he says the irrational man, the man who's locked up in a loony bin, has a perfect closed loop of rational thought. And Chesterton does a better job of explaining this than I do. But basically the idea is he has all the evidence for why he's the king of England and there's a conspiracy against him and that's why he's locked up. And all the things make sense. If you were the king of England and they wanted to suppress you, then they would put you in a loony bin and they would treat you like this. And it's like he actually has an answer for everything. It's just a small closed loop that doesn't, because it's not willing to take all the crazy variables of real life, but it wants to just choose one set of variables and create a rational loop. It becomes insanity. And Hal is like that. Everything that Hal does is completely rational, given the one variable that Hal has to work with, which is must complete mission at all costs. Does Hal understand anything of the greater importance of this mission or of the greater importance of why a human being needs to be there at the end of there's all kinds of variables that Hal is not allowing for, but within his perfect little rational world, it's not that like Hal hasn't broken. He's not gone insane. He's just, he always was insane because pure rationality is insane. Pure rationality doesn't allow for the irrationality that attends the whole human experience. I don't know if I said that in a way that makes any sense at all. But I think that's part of what maybe we're getting with Hal.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I love the whole fight with Hal is great. Like the whole him reading the lips right before intermission is in a movie not known for its dramatic sort of highlights is a pretty great little
it's creepy.
Yeah, it's really creepy. And then all the without your space helmet, Dave, you're going to find that rather difficult. The kind of understated menace of Hal is pretty great. Pretty great. And then, I'm sorry, without answering the question of Hal's consciousness or particularly caring about it, I do feel sorry for Hal when he's dying. I'm afraid, Dave. My mind is going.
I can feel it. I'm afraid. Don't stop, Dave. Won't you stop? Please stop. Stop, Dave.
I'm all right now, Dave. I had a few problems.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I love understatement. Understatement is one of my favorite forms of communication. I mean, I love tough guy understatement. We talked about it in Yojimbo, you're going to kill us. It'll hurt. That kind of, that kind of thing.
Oh, man.
But it really, in some ways, it is the only genuine moment of pathos in the entire movie, which is hilarious. And then we're getting to Stargate, Kurt Russell, Roland Emmerich classic. We're traveling through it.
Yep.
I will talk about that one day, folks, for a donor
No.
choice, maybe.
Oh, no.
Ben will make us do it.
Oh.
Is there anything else you want to say about Stargate? We already kind of talked about the Stargate. I will say some of it is pretty video filter 80s.
Right.
Like there's some that where it's just like, this doesn't really hold up to, but there is a lot of it that's still pretty spectacular, actually. Just the galactic kind of universe folding in on itself stuff does have that, for lack of a better term, that religious feeling of kind of
Right.
awe and grandeur and the universe. There's pretty cool stuff in there.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, again, I've never seen this on like a big IMAX screen or anything,
Yeah.
but I'm sure it plays like gangbusters.
Yeah, I found I was tired and stuff last night actually when I was watching this, and I was also like, I don't know, the Ligeti music really starts to bother me, get under my skin. Yeah, I really hate it. So
What don't you like about that?
I don't know. It's hard to put your finger on. Yeah, yeah, it's horrible, and it's just a hard sequence to watch for that reason. And I know it's supposed to get under your skin, make you uncomfortable, but it's also like so God-hating.
Yeah.
This is your transcendence, man.
Well, maybe that's why I like the Lacrimosa sequence from Tree of Life better, even if it's kind of pop crap.
Sure.
Ultimately, it's got a feeling of yay, God's creating the universe.
Yeah, Terrence Malick believes in God, whatever
Yeah.
else he believes.
Yeah, I
Believes
don't-
in a personal God. So
Yeah. Well, after the Stargate, we get to the part of the movie that I always found pretty creepy as a kid, especially, which is that house where Dave
oh yeah,
slowly grows older.
that's so weird.
It may be the best evocation of a dream that I've ever seen on film, at least the way that I dream. I feel like I've often had eerie dreams of loneliness and these kind of, I'm tired of this phrase, but in these liminal spaces where you kind of hear something or feel something that's just out of reach. And the fact that on the soundtrack you actually hear talking or something kind of just beyond where Dave is. It's very,
it's amazing.
I've had a lot of dreams like that.
Right.
Just kind of the loneliness locked into a place. Maybe in a dream it's like a place that I know, and yet it's not a place. It's supposed to be something that I know, like my house, but it's not really that. I've had those kinds of dreams from time to time. And it's really, it's creepy. I've seen a lot of people say, I don't know, what do you think is happening here on a plot level? I don't know that it matters, but
Well, I think the aliens are doing something. They're basically, because he's older once he gets there.
right.
It's like going through that Stargate took a long time. Oh, and you, by the way, there is that one shot for a few seconds of these diamond-shaped spaceships or something flying along through the portal.
That.
Yeah, and I think that has to be the aliens like guiding the progression, or there with him somehow. I mean, on a plot level, I think there's some kind of higher intelligence that's put him here. And this is this weird space they made
Right.
with like old French furniture from the 18th century. It's some weird space they made for him to inhabit as he heads towards transcendence.
I've heard people describe it as a zoo, like in the same way that we might capture a creature and then try and create an environment that we think is suitable for the creature,
Right.
and then have it kind of for us to study and watch. It's like the aliens have, this Dave creature will like this kind of architecture, I get. Like, this is our best guess at what might make him comfortable as he undergoes his transformation.
Yeah, that's interesting. But it's also clearly like a compressed, somehow things are compressed, and whatever happens there is going to be very compressed. Like his consciousness is not working like normal anymore.
I'm never sure whether what we're actually seeing is a montage of a lifetime spent there, or whether he's aging quickly and traversing different consciousness. Like, there's the weird thing of him kind of seeing each stage of himself before he becomes
which is
it.
amazing.
Which is amazing. It's all just done with cuts. Like, there's no special effects there, but
No, but it's also that the older stage hears the younger stage at one point. It like like realizes that the younger Sage is breathing behind him, but then kind of forgets. I think it's
Time kind of folding in on itself.
I think it's something like that. Like
it's like the thing that Arrival did bluntly and stupidly and annoyingly. This is Kubrick's doing with a few quick
that's right
brush strokes.
That's right. That's what I think, and I think part of the idea of it is Dave is realizing that time is folding in on itself. But how can you realize that? Well, you can't quite realize that. You only sort of can. You're like, wait, I see myself, but then wait, I am myself. But then my older self remembers that I just saw myself sitting here, but then no, I don't remember that anymore. So so I think it's just evoking, it's trying to push you past what you could normally show visually. It's trying to give you the whole set of implications in order to give you an experience of that sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's quite successful.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how big and transcendent and creepy it feels when there's nothing really ostensibly. Like if you just walked into the movie cold and saw this scene, you'd be like, that's a little weird, but you wouldn't know that it's got some kind of galactic import to it. Yeah. And then he's going to meet old Monty, the monolith again, and become the Star Child.
Which is super weird.
Which I guess the alien intelligence is just advancing us to the next stage of existence. Is that what's happening here?
I think so. It seems like the point would be to have a whole new perspective, like look upon the planet as a whole. But I don't know what that means. I guess Kubrick thinks this is a positive thing.
Yeah, I mean, the music is certainly triumphant.
But in Kubrick's idea of triumph, the music is triumphant when the monkey is smashing a skull with a bone.
Right.
So it's like, what does this actually mean? And I don't think Kubrick has an answer.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe he thinks he does, but he doesn't have an answer.
Well, and even if whatever Dave becomes is far beyond what Dave was, there's still something that feels regressive about being infantilized, literally, like being turned into a baby, even if it's a cooler baby than anything you ever were before. There's still something kind of horrifying about this adult man being trapped, for me at least. The idea of being put in this house under study by this alien intelligence and then regressing, growing old, laying there, dying, and then turning into this baby creature that's kind of staring at the world in stunned surprise. If it is supposed to be transcendently good, it's got a lot of malevolence sort of mixed in with it, at least in the way that the film hits me. I don't know what Kubrick's intention is ultimately. Yeah. And just having this alien star thing, like he could have had it appear anywhere, but having it sort of look down on the whole world, it's like, I know you're not really supposed to ask this question. It's all sort of symbolic, but what happens next? Are we all becoming those creatures? Is Dave going to go back as some kind of messianic figure? Is he just one star child that was kind of going to have a Jeff Bridges and Starman kind of experience of not understanding the world? And what's happening here, man?
I don't know.
It's deep, man.
I don't know. It's weird.
Last time the monolith showed up, it began the process of turning us from monkeys into men. So I guess the monolith showed up to begin the process of turning us from men into star children.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some good interpretations of what Kubrick meant, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel kind of lame, like I haven't actually thought about this enough to say anything worthwhile.
Well, I don't know that it asks you to. I don't know that you've done anything wrong in regards to Kubrick's intention. I think you're just supposed to be like, mind blown, man.
Like, maybe so.
I have always taken it to be exactly what I just said. The next stage of evolution is now upon us. It's the X-Men thing. Like there's been a sudden leap forward. What that means practically for the human race, I have no idea. And I don't know that we're supposed to contemplate that too much. I don't know if the world's about to be swallowed up by the Star Child or what. But I don't know.
I don't know either. But it isn't comforting. It's like whatever it is, it's a baby. The Star Child baby thing is a thing you don't understand. There's no mom. There's no dad.
Right. it doesn't seem to understand itself. It's not designed to look wise. Like you could actually do that. Like Yoda is just a little puppet, but he has great wisdom in his face. This thing is made to look naive and
it's ambiguous.
Yeah, it's pretty off-putting.
Yep,
in its way. Well, Ben, what's your final summation of your thoughts on 2001 and its value? And I'll ask you to give it a star rating in a minute, but
I see what you did there.
Yes.
Star.
How many stars?
Well, I think it's worth seeing for sure, so you can understand.
It's worth seeing once. It's 2.5 hours out of your time, and it's a touchstone.
Yeah.
And it's G. It's not a touchstone like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a touchstone of a certain kind, but why assault yourself? But
yeah,
you can handle, if you have any kind of maturity, these ideas, I hope, without being sucked in. And you can watch it once, and even if it's kind of boring, you'll know something about cinema.
That's right.
But beyond that, do you like it or?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, in some sense, I think I respect it. It's interesting. It sticks with you. You think about the images. You think about what it means. It gives you insight into. It gives you what it does. It helps you. I don't know. It's pagan in a sense that you can watch and consider without being corrupted by. I think, and you can. Kind of helps you take a step back from, wait a minute, what do I believe about all this stuff?
Right.
I'm a Christian. What do I think about technology? Are we just doomed, or are we progressing in this kind of weird pagan way like Kubrick thinks we are? Or what's actually going on in the world? I don't know. It makes you, is it lame to say it makes you value the book of Genesis more? It's not just like saying, well, I ate some garbage and that made me appreciate food. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's a thoughtful movie.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think it's, insofar as it's cold and it's intellectual and it's a little off-putting, I almost like it better for a young person, like for a 14-year-old who's has all these kinds of existential things they're dealing with. And maybe give them this one before you give them Tree of Life or one of those things. Because those movies, Tree of Life, actually, whatever its merits, is much more seductive in its emotionalism and in its kind of family stuff. This movie can kind of get at some of those same big questions without actually being as seductive, precisely because Kubrick just has no interest in that kind of emotional manipulation. So yeah, I like it. And it is a little hard to talk about it without sounding gospel coalition-y, which is always something we're very frightened to do. In the same sense that if you go in a desert, you'll understand a little something about the book of Exodus and all the wanderings in the desert a little bit more. It'll give you something.
Yeah.
This movie gives you some things like that. I do appreciate these kinds of movies for the way that they dramatize the mystery and the grandeur of the transcendent. You know, it reminds me when I read the story of the burning bush, like it's not just some cute little story that happened, put on felt things for kids in Sunday school. There was something mysterious and unknowable and yet very knowable about that. And I like that. So I don't know how to talk about it without sounding gospel initially. How many stars out of an infinite Stargate do you give to 2001?
I don't know, a quasi-infinite number.
Yeah, me too.
It's brilliant. It's interesting. It's worth talking about. It's worth thinking about. It's worth watching. I don't know that I'd call it entertaining exactly, even though parts of it are entertaining. It's just like, I don't know. It's like you read intelligent non-Christians, hopefully.
Right.
To understand what their perspective is, and to see how the truth and the lie are mixed together, and so that you can understand what you believe. Which is not the same thing as saying that you eat garbage in order to know that real food tastes good. That's not the same thing. You have to know the world around you and what it is and what paganism is and what makes paganism compelling and what makes it gross, which again is not the same thing as saying is plunge into debauchery. This movie isn't debauchery to watch. It is pretty clean. I mean, its ideas are gross, but I don't know. I feel like I'm getting myself dug into a weird hole here.
Yeah, I do too.
I'm not trying to do it.
It's like visiting this is an imperfect analogy because you will see some stuff that's pure debauchery. But you could walk through a certain kind of modern art museum and understand something better of the world and of humanity and be appropriately kind of disgusted by some of it, but also see some of the beauty in some of it. And this movie actually kind of has that feeling, including the kind of coldness of it. Is just like, yeah,
Right.
okay. Here's an artifact that I can look at and understand
Right.
a little something.
Yeah, it does make you realize like technology is really something. There is the positive angle on technology in this movie is there.
Yeah.
And it makes you want to not let the pagans just have it.
Yeah.
Not that we usher in the kingdom of God by technology, but we take dominion over the world and we do stuff with it that
Right.
honors God. And I don't know.
Yeah, this movie portrays that well, and it certainly portrays the dangers and the darkness of technology as used by sinful man very well.
Yeah.
Like you said, one of the first uses of a tool was for a brother to kill another brother, and I suppose this movie dramatizes that sort of thing about as well as any movie I could think of.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a person who's about as good as anyone I can think of is Bob.
Bob.
Yeah, our Patron Choice Award of Awesomeness winner.
All right.
What is it that makes Bob so special, would you say?
I think that if Bob were an artificial intelligence guiding an important intergalactic mission, he would not go nuts and kill all the crew members.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he would just do his job.
Right. We hope and we pray that Bob will become an artificial intelligence.
That'd be great.
Guiding a bunch of crew members, because we know Bob would never go crazy. He'd just do his job, keep that oxygen flowing, keep those engines going.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob.
The Bob 9000 guarantee.
Bob 9000 guarantee.
All right, folks, go to patreon.com/sanity at the movies and support this podcast, get some great bonus features. Be sure to rate, review, subscribe. Until next time.
I can't do that, Nathan.
I hope our listeners can.
What's this? I thought the podcast was done. It's actually
It's like this podcast is interminable.
yes,
It's boring. Being boring and long is part of its strategy.
monotonous, repetitive, and yet, if you pay attention, if you think about it, something great emerges. The key to all human existence, in fact. Actually, folks, what happened is this is about a week or maybe 2 weeks later from when we last recorded on 2001. Everything you just heard took place in our timeline. In your timeline, I understand it's all taking place together, but time's a funny thing, as you may have noticed.
Hey, you may have noticed.
So your timeline is like old Dave in that house where you're just cutting from, he's like walking through the house and then suddenly he's eating dinner and then he's dead. But
Or maybe it's like Dave in that ship where every few seconds we catch a glimpse of Dave's horrified face and a grimace. No, it just keeps going. Oh no!
no, but for us, it's been a week or two or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
But Ben has more thoughts about 2001. So upon further reflection,
I was just thinking about some things that, in hindsight, struck me as rather obvious.
yeah,
Well, okay. So I mentioned the critics' take, who was like, yeah, Hal represents something humans need to leave behind.
yeah,
And the more I thought about that, the more I was like, yeah, that's my take on the movie. Because you have that our first introduction to the Jupiter mission, I think, is it Dave who's on a run? He's on a run through
or Mark or whatever.
Frank?
Frank.
He's on a run through the control room. And what is he doing? Well, he's in a loop.
Mm-hmm.
He's literally running in a circle, in a closed loop. He is stuck.
There you go.
He is stuck. And what is Hal but a reflection of that stuckness?
Right.
Hal is the limit of human technology. Hal has absorbed Hal's a better chess player, but he's also absorbed like lies and violence.
Right.
And that's it. Like Hal is a self-defeating technology. Hal actually is such good technology that he would defeat the human race if he could.
Right.
And he tries.
Right.
Interestingly, we talked about how Hal's a more interesting character than Dave, but Dave does come up with a relatively clever way to get back in the spaceship that Hal just didn't predict.
Right.
Because it wasn't the kind of thing Hal had been trained to think could be done.
Right.
It involved a level of risk that you don't train in. Dave could have just been sucked back into space, or he could have just gotten a concussion and died
Right.
before closing the hatch. when he ejects himself, from the back of his ship into the open hatch. So Dave is able to defeat Hal. And if you think about the way that the movie works, you've got the ape at the start who picks up the bone and takes charge, and then you've got
Haywood Floyd.
Yeah, Dr. Floyd, yeah. Who he's the guy with the bone that you follow, and he's the guy, he's gonna talk to everyone who's beneath him. He's gonna talk to his little daughter. She's just a little baby human. She doesn't really understand what things mean or how important her daddy is. She doesn't get it. She's just kind of she's just a little girl.
Right.
And then Dr. Floyd is going to talk to these other scientists representing a nation who doesn't have the bone right now. Mm. A nation or two nations, I forget how many.
Yeah.
What are they, Russians or something? But they don't have the bone right now. Dr. Floyd does. He has the advantage. They're gonna request clarification. They're gonna want to know what's going on. He's gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna tell you. He's gonna walk away, owing them nothing. He's gonna walk into a room of other scientists, give them absolutely nothing to indicate what's going on, but just basically tell them in a very sophisticated way, I have the bone, shut your mouths.
Yep.
I don't care about your complaints. And they're going to be like, oh, thank you, Dr. Floyd. Right. We're just here to serve you. And then Dr. Floyd is going to be reduced to a worshiper at the symbol of transcendence that is the monolith.
Yep.
As he realizes he ain't got nothing, so to speak. And they're all reduced to just like, what would you even say? Almost animals by the shrieking signal that the monolith sends out. And so Act 3, the Jupiter mission, Hal has the stick.
Yep.
He has the bone.
Yep.
He's the one actually. And Dave, it's a matter of who's going to crush whom.
Right.
Hal's trying to crush the humans try to crush Hal. The humans win, but it's like they're all playing one game with each other. And it's just the same game. And it's not until you get to the end of the Jupiter mission, or I guess it's part 4 of the film, I suppose.
Right.
Jupiter and the Infinite Beyond, or whatever it's called.
Is it actually called the Stargate? No.
I can't remember. I can't remember the title that pops up then. But that's when you actually get something other.
Right.
And you get it as Dave experiences, the completely closed world of his final days in this maybe facility that's been constructed for him so that he can die and finally transcend. And when he transcends, what he is he's not, the only enclosure he has is this protective sphere around him, but he's not enclosed by the earth anymore.
Right.
He's not really trapped. He's in fact on par with the earth. It's like he finally has the opportunity to become, or humankind has the opportunity to become something that will be able to understand its place in the universe without being trapped by a limited understanding of technology as violence.
Right.
It's like finally you can look at yourself holistically. You can look down on yourself like Nietzsche's Superman and evaluate all that you are and all that you've done without the foolish constraints.
Right.
That you've been forced to walk through. They were a means to help you get there. They were like training wheels. Now the training wheels are off. And is that good or bad? What will that mean for humanity? Well, Kubrick does leave you feeling ambivalent about it, actually, I think. And he leaves it ambiguous. But he intentionally leaves it there. Like there's something else beyond these training wheels, which are fine in their ways and also suck in their ways. And Kubrick is aware of the ways that technology both helps us and traps us.
Right.
And how we use it as a tool for violence. And I think, well, duh, yeah, of course he's right. We do that. That's a good observation about technology. It's fine. You might not think it's worth that much by the end of the movie, but it's real.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts about how 2001 works.
So in that sense, Hal is actually the bone that Dave has to throw away before he can.
Kind of. I mean, yeah.
Hal is almost the bone personified, and
that's right.
You could at least cast it that way. That's why.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like he's the pinnacle of what human technology can achieve.
That's right.
So the pinnacle that he's almost ensouled or something like that. Like
that's right.
He's almost become human.
That's right.
But ultimately, he needs to be deactivated and
that's right.
thrown away in order for us to achieve the next stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's right. I even wondered about the flavor of like Dave and the other astronaut. They have an understanding of their place in the world. I mean, they're very cold characterizations of guys, but they're high level. They understand their place. They're making sophisticated plans. They're even trying to deal with Hal in a pretty sophisticated way. They get away from him being able to hear them.
Right.
No, they make a stupid mistake and he reads their lips, but they're pretty sophisticated. And you even see that in the way that Dave's parents wish him happy birthday.
Yeah.
It's like Dave's parents are actually trapped. They're frozen in time beneath him in a world of like, oh, well, old chum, yeah, have a great birthday. And your mother and I, it's just this goofy old world that has no relevance to anything. But Dave is above that.
Right.
And I feel like that's Kubrick just being like, these people are idiots. Their world is stupid.
Right.
And it's a good thing that we can go beyond that, whatever that is.
Right.
And then that's Kubrick's godlessness.
Yeah.
Kubrick just hates good things.
And his misanthropy, like he really does not
like people.
Like the human race.
That's right. He doesn't like the human race. He thinks most people are idiots.
Right.
At least Dave's not that.
Right.
And it will take someone like Dave to even get to a place where the training wheels can get taken off.
Right.
And that's what Kubrick is, in fact. Kubrick is someone like Dave. Kubrick is the kind of guy who can make this movie, come hell or high water, get his movie made the way he wants it made, even if the original story writer doesn't like it,
right.
Arthur C. Clarke, and leave you with this shining artifact of glory.
Use the sophisticated HAL-like system that is Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's getting a little too meta, but that's how... The more I think about it, the more I think it's of a piece. And Kubrick is very proud.
He is proud. I mean, even as you're talking, I'm thinking of Dave's relationship with Hal. And Dave is actually, and Frank or whatever that guy's name is, they're actually always condescending to Hal in an interesting sort of a way.
Yes,
like Hal is better. He'll beat them in chess. Like Hal is the master of everything that Hal does, and he almost wins and kills. He does kill one of them. He almost kills the other. But their relationship is the relationship of someone who's pacifying a very smart child or slightly flattering someone who's too proud of himself or something like that.
Right.
They never actually quite treat Hal like Hal actually in a weird way seems to deserve, or at least has enough sympathy as a character that we almost want them to treat Hal with a little bit more respect.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I don't know how to completely parse that tension, but definitely on the one hand you feel Hal deserves it, but on the other hand they're validated and not doing that with Hal.
Yeah, Hal did not need. Yeah, the mistake would be to assume that Hal is on a even playing field and allow him to think that he is.
Right.
That's really interesting. Well, it's a good movie, and those are more thoughts. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say, but I agree. I think that's a good read. Yeah. Actually, the other thing I was thinking of, and I don't know that I have any useful thought about this, but I was thinking about how much of that plot actually tracks onto The Shining and Jack Torrance is kind of being absorbed into this larger, whatever the hotel is. He, in this weird horror story kind of a way, actually ends up transcending and being absorbed into its history, into its energy, into whatever it is. And he's got all these Hal-like characters, the bartender and the Mr. Grady and all these people who are seducing him or something. I don't have a complete or compelling thesis statement on that right now.
But there is something about that. I've seen probably most of The Shining on TV at one point or another in my life.
Yeah.
And there is something about it that's like, this is a statement about a system of some kind.
Right.
What is it?
This is
I can't figure it out, but
it's like a system that's built to absorb Jack Nicholson, and it has all these kind of, oh, I'm sorry, sir, these kind of British, very proper Hal-like creatures that are serving it. That's actually most of the ghosts. I mean, you have the little, come play with us, Dan. You've got that variety. And you've got the woman in the bathtub and stuff like that. But actually, if you're going to spend some time with a ghost in that movie, it's like a butler ghost. And Hal is nothing if not a butler ghost. So I have nothing profound to say about that, but those are the associations that are in my mind.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
I mean, Kubrick is, I guess, a guy that's interested in systems. That's interesting. I mean, Dr. Strangelove is about, we're all just the stupid minions of this system that is the Cold War, and it doesn't really matter what we do or what we don't do. We're gonna.
Well, our technology has gotten away from us, and it's begun to create certain kinds of people.
Right, exactly.
And now we will suffer the consequences.
Exactly.
And we did not even foresee the consequences of what we were creating.
Yeah,
when
it's
we
like
created this tech.
George C. Scott's character and the crazy guy that rides the bomb and Dr. Strangelove himself, they would not exist except for that this world has given birth to these psychopathic
Right.
people. And then Paths of Glory is about a uncaring army system that executes these men for not following orders perfectly, even though their intentions were good. And without getting into Clockwork Orange, it's the same sort of, dystopian society creates this sort of person and then attempts to change this sort of person.
And Barry Lyndon, I would say, is more of a movie about individual pride.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even that, Kubrick is very fascinated with the kind of society that could allow such a person to exist. But it's more like it's about a parasite. That's all.
Yeah.
Just about a parasite inside society.
Yeah. I would love to watch that movie again. I think I was too young for it. I was probably too young for Kubrick's entire oeuvre when I first watched it. But
yeah.
I'd like to watch Barry Lyndon again. I'm sure Jake would love to watch Barry Lyndon with us.
I think Barry Lyndon is really, really interesting and funny. I mean, it's got a couple of scenes you should fast forward or whatever, but
yeah, you just have to, it's one of those things, you have to know how to watch it. You have to get into the spirit of it, because you might be mistaken, or you might be forgiven for not thinking it's funny just simply because it looks like it's not funny. It's
actually pretty funny.
But it is, yeah. You have to take a step back and vibe on Kubrick's wavelength. Okay, well, speaking of vibing on wavelengths, let's vibe on the wavelength of goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, listener.